Hello friends. Did you know that nearly 80% of those who watch my videos aren't subscribed? If you enjoy the content, I'd truly appreciate it if you hit that subscribe button. It helps a lot. Also, don't forget to leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments. Your interaction not only supports the channel's growth, but also helps these stories reach more people. Thank you all for being here. By the way, where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. I became a Montana Highway Patrol trooper when I was 26 years old. Not because I had some deep calling or family legacy, but because I grew up in a place where the roads stretched longer than most people's entire lives, and somebody had to watch over them. My name is Calder Whitlow, and by the time this happened, I'd been wearing the badge for 7 years. 7 years of long shifts on US 2, the Highline corridor that cuts across the northern edge of Montana like a scar. It's beautiful country if you're passing through in daylight. Rolling plains, endless sky, the kind of horizon that makes you feel small in a good way. But at night, especially in winter, it becomes something else entirely. The darkness out here doesn't just fall, it swallows. No streetlights for 60 miles in some stretches, no gas stations, no rest stops, just you and the center line, and whatever decides to wander onto the blacktop. Most of my shifts were routine. Speeders, mostly truckers trying to make time. Occasionally, a stranded motorist with a blown tire or an overheated engine. Once in a while, something more serious. A rollover, a DUI, a domestic dispute that spilled onto the shoulder. But you learn to read the night out here. You learn its rhythms, its silences, the way the wind sounds different when a storm is coming versus when it's just restless. You learn that some nights feel heavier than others, and when that happens, you keep your radio close and your eyes open. This was one of those nights. It was late February, the kind of cold that turns your breath to ice crystals before it even leaves your lungs. I'd started my shift at 1800 hours. Rolling out of the station in Havre just as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the western sky in shades of bruised purple and rust. The forecast called for light snow, nothing serious, but the wind was picking up, and wind on the High Line can turn a minor inconvenience into a whiteout in under an hour. I'd checked my equipment before leaving. Flashlight, flares, first aid kit, road spikes, everything in its place. My cruiser, Unit 47, was a newer model Ford Interceptor with decent heat and a reliable engine, which mattered more than most people realize when you're 40 miles from the nearest town and the temperature's dropping below zero. The first few hours passed without incident. I ran a few plates, pulled over a pickup doing 82 in a 70, gave the driver a warning since he was local and I knew his family. Small courtesies matter in places like this. People remember. By 2100 hours, I was eastbound near mile marker 394, about halfway between Havre and Malta, when dispatch crackled through the static. Unit 47, this is dispatch. We've got a report of hazard lights on US 2 eastbound, approximately mile marker 402. Caller says they saw flashing red and blue, possibly emergency vehicle, but couldn't see the unit clearly. Can you respond? I keyed the mic. Unit 47, copy. I'm 8 miles out. Any description of the vehicle? There was a pause, longer than usual. Then the dispatcher, a woman named Tess Reddick, who usually worked ICU at the hospital but picked up dispatch shifts for extra money, came back on. Negative. Caller said the lights were intermittent. Thought it might be a stranded patrol or ambulance, but they lost sight of it in the weather. Visibility's dropping fast out there, Calder. Be careful. I acknowledged and pushed the accelerator. Not speeding exactly, but closing the distance. 8 miles on the High Line at night feels like 80. The snow had started. Small, dry flakes that danced in my headlights like static. The road was empty. No taillights ahead, no headlights behind. Just me and the darkness, and that familiar knot in my stomach that comes when something doesn't add up. If there was an emergency vehicle out here, I would have heard it on the radio. We're a small enough operation that everyone knows who's working and where. And if it wasn't one of ours, what was it? As I approached mile marker 400, I slowed down, scanning both shoulders. The wind had picked up, pushing the snow horizontally across the road in ghostly curtains. Visibility was maybe a quarter mile, not terrible, but not great either. Then I saw them. Red and blue lights flickering in the distance, maybe half a mile ahead. They were off to the right, on the shoulder or just beyond it, pulsing in that unmistakable emergency pattern. But something was wrong. The lights were too high, like they were elevated above the road, and they seemed to shift position slightly, moving from right to left and back again, as if the vehicle was rocking or turning. I radioed it in. Dispatch, Unit 47. I've got visual on the lights at approximately mile marker 401. Approaching with caution. Tessa's voice came back, strained. Copy, 47. Do you need backup? I hesitated. Negative, not yet. I'll advise. I closed the distance slowly, my own light bar off, relying on my headlights and the dying glow of dusk that still clung to the western horizon. As I got closer, maybe 200 yards out, the lights stopped moving. They just hung there, pulsing steadily, red-blue, casting strange shadows across the snow-covered plains. I could see now that they were definitely off the roadway, maybe 20 or 30 feet into the field. No vehicle visible, just the lights. My grip tightened on the wheel. At 100 yards, I hit my spotlight, sweeping it across the area. The beam caught nothing but snow and dead grass, and the empty expanse of the prairie. The emergency lights flickered once, twice, and then went dark. Completely dark. No fade, no gradual dimming, just gone. I stopped the cruiser in the middle of the road, flashers on, and sat there for a moment, listening. The radio hissed softly. The engine hummed, the wind buffeted the car, making it creak. But there was no other sound. No voices calling for help, no idling engine, nothing. I stepped out into the cold, and the wind hit me like a fist. The temperature had dropped at least 10 degrees since sunset, and the snow was coming harder now, small, sharp flakes that stung my face. I pulled my Stetson down and clicked on my flashlight, sweeping the beam toward where I'd seen the lights. The snow was fresh here, maybe an inch deep, and it showed no tire tracks, no footprints, no sign that any vehicle had been here at all. I walked closer, my boots crunching through the frozen crust beneath the powder. 20 feet from the road. 30. Still nothing. Then I saw them. Tracks, but not from tires. These were footprints, human, leading away from the road and deeper into the field. They were strange, uneven, as if the person had been stumbling or dragging one leg. And they were filling in fast with fresh snow, which meant they were recent. Very recent. I followed them with my light, and they led in a straight line toward a low rise, maybe 50 yards out. Beyond that, nothing but darkness and open prairie for miles. "Hello?" I called out, my voice swallowed by the wind. "Montana Highway Patrol. If you need assistance, make yourself known." No response. I radioed again. "Dispatch, Unit 47. I've got footprints leading away from the roadway. No vehicle in sight. Requesting backup to my location." This time, Tessa's response was almost immediate. "Copy, 47. Nearest unit is Trooper Ashdown, 40 minutes out from Bozeman Pass. Do you want me to call County Sheriff?" 40 minutes, that was a long time to stand here in the snow, following tracks that led God knows where. But something about the lights, the way they'd just vanished, made me uneasy. "Affirmative. Get County rolling. I'm going to follow these tracks a short distance, see if I can locate the individual." I should have waited. Procedure says you don't go into the field alone at night, especially in weather like this. But out here, procedure sometimes takes a back seat to practicality. If someone was hurt, if they were hypothermic or injured, 40 minutes could be the difference between life and death. I started following the tracks, keeping my flashlight trained on them, my right hand resting on my service weapon. The footprints were clear enough at first. Boots, maybe size 10 or 11, definitely adult. They led in a straight line, no wavering, no circling back. Whoever made them knew where they were going. After about 40 yards, I reached the low rise and paused. The tracks continued down the other side, but something made me stop. The wind had died down suddenly, unnaturally, and the snow seemed to hang suspended in the air for just a moment. That's when I heard it. A voice, faint and distorted, like someone speaking through water. It came from somewhere ahead, down in the hollow beyond the rise. I couldn't make out words, just a tone, low and repetitive, almost like a chant or a prayer. "This is Montana Highway Patrol," I called again, louder this time. "I need you to identify yourself." The voice stopped. The silence that followed was absolute. Not even the wind dared to move. Then, from behind me, back toward the road, I heard it again. The same voice, the same tone, but now it was coming from the direction I'd just come from. I spun around, my flashlight cutting through the snow. Nothing. Just my footprints leading back to the cruiser, which sat on the road with its flashers still pulsing. Red and blue. Red and blue. I turned back toward the hollow and the tracks were gone. Not filled in by snow, just gone, as if they'd never been there at all. The ground was smooth, undisturbed, fresh powder covering everything. I swept my light in a wide arc, searching for any sign, any disturbance, but there was nothing. My own footprints were still visible behind me, clear as day. But the ones I'd been following, the ones that had led me out here, had simply vanished. That's when I felt it, the cold. Not the natural cold of a Montana winter, but something deeper, something that seemed to seep up from the ground itself. My breath fogged in thick clouds, and I realized I could no longer feel my fingers despite my gloves. The temperature had dropped again, fast, too fast. I backed away slowly, retracing my steps toward the cruiser, my eyes scanning the darkness. The feeling of being watched was overwhelming, irrational, but undeniable. Something out here wanted me to see those lights. Something had drawn me away from the road. I made it back to the cruiser and climbed inside, slamming the door and cranking the heat. My hands were shaking, and I told myself it was just the cold, just adrenaline. I radioed dispatch. "Unit 47 to dispatch. Footprints have disappeared. No sign of any individual. Weather's deteriorating rapidly. I'm returning to primary route." Tessa's voice crackled back. "Copy, 47. County's en route. Should be there in 20. Do you want to wait for them?" I looked out at the field, at the place where the lights had been, where the tracks had led. The snow was coming down harder now, and visibility was dropping by the minute. "Negative," I said. "Have them proceed to my last known. I'm going to continue patrol eastbound and circle back." I put the cruiser in drive and pulled back onto the highway, my headlights cutting through the storm. As I accelerated away, I glanced in the rearview mirror one last time. And that's when I saw them again. The lights, red and blue, pulsing in the exact spot where I'd been standing just moments before. And this time, silhouetted against the glow, was a figure, standing perfectly still, watching. I didn't stop. I drove east for 5 miles before pulling over again, my heart pounding in my chest. When I called dispatch to report what I'd seen, Tess went quiet for a long moment. Then she said something that made my blood run cold. "Calder, this isn't the first report we've had. 3 weeks ago, same stretch of road, same lights. Nobody found anything then either." I asked her why she hadn't told me before, and her answer was simple. Because we didn't want you to think you were crazy. The county sheriff's deputy arrived at my location 40 minutes later, just as I'd finished my third cup of truck stop coffee and tried to convince myself that what I'd seen had a rational explanation. His name was Ephraim Talmadge, a tow operator who sometimes worked contract security for the county when they were short-staffed. He pulled up behind my cruiser in his beat-up Dodge Ram with the yellow beacon on top, emergency lights casting long shadows across the snow-covered highway. I stepped out to meet him, and the look on his face told me he'd heard the stories too. "Whitlow," he said, extending a gloved hand. His grip was firm, weathered from years of hauling wrecked vehicles off mountain passes. "Dispatch said you saw the lights." I nodded, choosing my words carefully. "Mile marker 401 just off the shoulder. Red and blue emergency pattern, no vehicle, no tracks leading to or from. Footprints that disappeared." Ephraim pulled out a cigarette and lit it, cupping the flame against the wind. "Same as the others." He took a long drag and exhaled slowly. "You talked to Reddick about what happened before?" I shook my head. She mentioned there were other reports, but that's it. Ephraim glanced back toward the spot where I'd seen the lights, now just a dark expanse of white interrupted only by the occasional gust of wind-driven snow. First one was January 18th. Trooper out of Glasgow, name of Harrell. He was running radar near mile marker 396 when he got a call about a possible rollover. Lights, smoke, the whole 9 yards. By the time he got there, nothing. Just like you. He followed what he thought were drag marks into the field. Figured maybe someone had been thrown from a vehicle. Found a single glove, frozen stiff, looked like it had been there for years. He paused, taking another drag. Sent it to the lab. Came back dated to 1907. Leather, old style, the kind truckers used to wear. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. And the second report? Ephraim tossed his cigarette into the snow, where it hissed and died. February 3rd. Young trooper, first year on the job. Name of Millard. Same stretch of road, different mile marker. She saw the lights, too. Followed protocol, called it in, waited for backup. But while she was waiting, her radio started acting up. Static, voices she couldn't identify, dispatch codes that didn't make sense. She said it sounded like old recordings, like someone was playing back calls from years ago. When backup arrived, her dashcam had recorded the whole thing. Lights in the field, her approach, everything. Except, he turned to look at me directly. The timestamp on the footage was wrong. It showed a date 3 weeks in the past. Same location, same weather conditions, but the wrong date. My mouth had gone dry. What did the investigation find? Ephraim shrugged, but there was something in his eyes, something that said he didn't believe the official story. Equipment malfunction. The glove was contaminated evidence, probably from an old case file that got mixed up. The lights were atmospheric phenomenon, ice crystals reflecting headlights from the interstate. Standard explanations for things that don't add up. He kicked at the snow. But we both know that's bullshit. This highway's been here since the 1930s. You know how many accidents we've had out here? How many people have died on this stretch? I didn't answer because I knew where he was going with this. Every road has its history, its body count. US 2 was no different. Truck drivers falling asleep at the wheel. Tourists misjudging the winter conditions. Locals pushing their luck in whiteout conditions. The High Line collected its dead quietly, efficiently, marking each one with a white cross on the shoulder if the family bothered to put one up. Most didn't. "So, what are we dealing with?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. Ephraim looked out at the darkness, and for a moment I thought he wasn't going to respond. Then he said, There was an accident here. February 1983. A state patrol car responding to a distress call, same area, same conditions. Trooper's name was Vance Holloway. He was following reports of a stranded motorist, but when he got there, no one was around. He radioed it in, said he was going to search the area. They found his cruiser the next morning, engine still running, driver's door open, lights on. No sign of Holloway. They searched for weeks, brought in dogs, helicopters, the whole works. Nothing. He just vanished. The wind picked up, howling across the empty plains, and I pulled my jacket tighter. You think that's what we're seeing? Some kind of echo? Ephraim shook his head slowly. I don't know what to think, but I do know that every report we've had matches the conditions from that night. Temperature drop, snow, low visibility, and every trooper who's seen the lights has reported the same thing. Footprints leading away from the road, a voice in the distance, and the feeling that something's trying to lead them out there. He gestured toward the dark field. Whatever's out there, it wants something, and I don't think it's finished. We stood in silence for a long moment, the only sound the idling of our engines and the wind cutting across the highway. Finally, Ephraim pulled out his radio. I'm going to call this in to the sheriff, see if we can get someone from the state archives to pull the old case files. Maybe there's something in Holloway's reports, some detail that got missed. I nodded, but my attention had shifted. Something was wrong. The air had changed, grown heavier, and that same unnatural cold I'd felt earlier was creeping back. I could see my breath coming in thick plumes, far more than the ambient temperature should produce. Ephraim, I said quietly, do you feel that? He stopped mid-reach for his radio and looked up. His expression shifted from confusion to recognition in an instant. Yeah, temperature's dropping. But it wasn't just dropping, it was plummeting. In the space of maybe 30 seconds, the cold went from uncomfortable to dangerous. My fingers started to go numb inside my gloves, and the moisture in my nostrils froze with each breath. The snow around us seemed to intensify, though the wind had died down to almost nothing. And then I saw them again, the lights. Not in the field this time, but closer, much closer. They appeared on the road itself, maybe 100 yards ahead, red and blue pulses reflecting off the snow and ice. But this time, I could see the source. It was a vehicle, or something shaped like one. A Montana Highway Patrol cruiser, older model, boxy and angular like the ones from the 80s. It sat in the middle of the eastbound lane, emergency lights on, driver's door open. Do you see that? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Ephraim had gone pale. Yeah, I see it. We both moved slowly toward our vehicles, hands instinctively moving toward our sidearms. The Phantom Cruiser didn't move, didn't fade. It just sat there, lights pulsing in that steady hypnotic rhythm. As we got closer, I could make out more details. The unit number on the side, 23. The license plate, old Montana issue. And leaning against the open driver's door, a figure in a trooper's uniform. He was facing away from us, looking out into the field, one hand resting on the door frame. His posture was wrong, too stiff, too still, like a mannequin positioned by someone who'd never seen a real person stand. Unit 23, Ephraim whispered. That was Holloway's number. I reached for my radio, but before I could key the mic, static erupted from the speaker, loud and distorted. Through the interference, I heard a voice. Dispatch, Unit 23. I've located the stranded motorist. Approximately 30 yards off the roadway. No vehicle visible. I'm going to investigate on foot. The voice was calm, professional, exactly what you'd expect from a state trooper reporting in. But it was wrong. The quality was off, like an old recording played through a damaged speaker. and beneath the words I could hear something else. A sound like wind or breathing, or both. The static cut out abruptly, and in the sudden silence the figure by the cruiser turned. Not quickly, not naturally, but with a slow, mechanical precision that made every instinct in my body scream to run. The face was wrong. Not grotesque or monstrous, but wrong in a way that was harder to define. The features were there, eyes, nose, mouth, but they didn't quite align properly, as if seen through warped glass, and the expression was blank, empty, waiting. Ephraim grabbed my arm. "We need to leave, now." But I couldn't move. Something about the figure held me, not physically, but with a pull I couldn't explain. It raised one hand slowly, deliberately, and pointed toward the field. The same direction the footprints had led. The same direction Holloway had gone 42 years ago. "He wants us to follow," I heard myself say. "No," Ephraim said firmly, pulling harder on my arm. "That's exactly what we're not going to do. Get in your cruiser, we're backing out of here." The figure took a step forward, then another. Its movements were jerky, unnatural, like a film skipping frames. With each step, the temperature dropped further, and I could feel ice forming on my eyelashes. The emergency lights on the Phantom cruiser began to pulse faster, more erratically, and the static returned to my radio, building in intensity until it was almost a scream. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the cruiser was gone. Not fading, not driving away, just gone. The lights, the figure, all of it vanished in an instant, leaving only darkness and snow and the two of us standing on an empty highway. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. I got into my cruiser, Ephraim got into his truck, and we both backed away from that spot. Slowly at first, then faster. I didn't turn around until I was a full mile west, and even then I kept checking my rearview mirror, half expecting to see those red and blue lights following. When I finally radioed dispatch, my voice was steadier than I felt. "Unit 47 to dispatch, returning to station. Will file full report in the morning." Tess's response was immediate. "Copy, 47. Are you all right?" I wanted to say yes. I wanted to tell her it was nothing. Just weather and stress and an overactive imagination. But I couldn't lie, not about this. "I don't know," I said. "I honestly don't know." The rest of the night passed in a blur. I drove back to Havre, filed a preliminary report that left out most of what I'd actually seen, and sat in the break room until sunrise, drinking bad coffee and trying to process what had happened. Ephraim had done the same, pulling his truck into the station lot and sitting in the cab with the engine running, staring at nothing. When the day shift started filtering in around 0600, they found us both there, exhausted and shaken but unable to explain why. The shift commander, a gruff veteran named Sergeant Brickman, took one look at us and pulled me into his office. "What happened out there?" he asked, closing the door behind us. I told him everything. The lights, the footprints, the Phantom cruiser, the figure, all of it. He listened without interrupting, his expression unreadable. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he opened a drawer in his desk and pulled out a file folder. Old and worn, the kind that's been passed from desk to desk for years. "This is unofficial," he said, sliding it across to me. "Technically, it doesn't exist, but I think you should read it." Inside were copies of reports, incident logs, and witness statements dating back to 1983. The disappearance of Trooper Vance Holloway, the failed search and rescue operation, the investigation that concluded with no answers. But there were other documents too, reports from troopers and civilians dating back even further. 1976, 1968, 1952. All describing the same thing. Lights on the highway, footprints leading nowhere, voices in the storm. And in every case, the reports were dismissed as weather-related illusions or equipment failures. But there was one document that made my hands start shaking. It was a memo from 1983, written by the lead investigator on the Holloway case. In it, he described finding Holloway's dashcam footage. The tape had been damaged, water and cold had corrupted most of it, but they'd been able to recover fragments. The last clear image showed Holloway walking into the field, following something. And in the final frame, just before the footage cut out, you could see what he was following. His own cruiser, his own lights, himself. "What does this mean?" I asked, though part of me already knew. Sergeant Brickman leaned back in his chair. "It means that whatever's out there, it's been doing this for a long time. It shows people what they're trained to respond to. Emergency lights, calls for help, footprints in the snow. And then it leads them away from the road. Some come back, some don't." He paused. Holloway never did. But his cruiser turned up 3 weeks later, parked at the same mile marker where he disappeared. Engine cold, no tracks, no sign it had been moved, just there, like it had always been there. I closed the file, my mind racing. What do we do about it? The sergeant shrugged. Same thing we've always done. Respond to calls, patrol the highway, do our jobs. But we don't go into the field alone. We don't follow the lights. And we sure as hell don't let it lead us away from the road. He stood up, signaling the conversation was over. "Get some rest, Whitlow. You look like you need it. And when you come back on shift, maybe stick to the western sector for a while. Give the High Line some space." I left his office and found Ephraim waiting in the hallway. He'd been given the same talk, shown the same file. We stood there for a moment. Two people who'd seen something they couldn't explain and couldn't forget. "You ever going back out there?" he asked. I thought about it. Thought about Holloway, about all the others who'd seen the lights. Thought about that figure pointing into the darkness, waiting. "Yeah," I said finally. "It's my job, but next time I'm not following the footprints." Ephraim nodded slowly. "Good, because I got a feeling that's exactly what it wants." We parted ways, and I drove home through the gray morning light, the streets of Havre slowly coming to life around me. But even in the safety of daylight, even surrounded by normal people doing normal things, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed me back. Not physically, but in a way that was harder to define. A weight, a presence, a knowledge that the road had seen me now and wouldn't forget. That night, I didn't sleep. I just sat by the window, watching the street, waiting for red and blue lights that never came. But every time a car passed, every time a shadow moved, I felt that same cold creeping back. And I knew, with a certainty that terrified me, that this wasn't over. The High Line had more secrets, more traps, more ways to pull you off the road. And sooner or later, I'd have to go back out there, because that's what we do. We patrol the highways, we respond to calls, we follow the lights, even when we shouldn't. 3 weeks passed before I went back to the High Line. 3 weeks of working the western sector, running speed traps near Shelby, responding to fender benders and livestock on the highway, the routine stuff that keeps you busy without keeping you up at night. But I knew it was temporary. The High Line was part of my regular rotation, and eventually I'd have to face it again. What I didn't expect was that it would be waiting for me. It was mid-March when dispatch called me back to US 2. The weather had warmed slightly, enough that the snow had started to melt during the day before refreezing at night, creating treacherous black ice conditions. I'd drawn the late shift, 1800 to 0600, and I was eastbound near Malta, when Tess Reddick's voice crackled through the radio around 20 to 30 hours. Unit 47, dispatch. We've got a report of a possible injury accident. Eastbound US 2, mile marker 398. Caller reports seeing a vehicle off the roadway, headlights on, no movement. Can you respond? My stomach tightened. Mile marker 398. 3 miles from where I'd seen the lights. Unit 47, copy. What's the caller's information? There was a pause, and I could hear papers shuffling in the background. Anonymous call from a payphone in Malta. Male caller wouldn't give his name. Said he was passing through and saw what looked like a car in the ditch. Dispatch tried to get more information, but he hung up. A payphone. Nobody used payphones anymore, hadn't for years. Most of them had been torn out or left to rot. Dispatch, are there even working payphones in Malta? Another pause. I'll check on that, but Whitlow, we've got a possible injury accident. You need to respond. She was right. Anonymous or not, payphone or not, if there was even a chance someone was hurt out there, I had to check it out. Copy. Dispatch. I'm 20 minutes out, requesting backup. This time, Tessa's response came quickly. Nearest unit is Trooper Millard, 40 minutes from Glasgow. Do you want to wait for her? I thought about it. Thought about waiting in the dark for 40 minutes while someone might be bleeding out in a wrecked car. Thought about Sergeant Brickman's warning not to go into the field alone. But I also thought about the oath I'd taken, the responsibility that came with the badge. Negative. I'll proceed with caution and advise if backup is needed. The drive to mile marker 398 felt longer than it should have. The highway was empty, not a single vehicle in either direction, and the darkness seemed thicker somehow, more oppressive. The moon was hidden behind a layer of clouds, and my headlights only penetrated maybe 50 yards ahead before being swallowed by the night. I kept my speed at 60, scanning both shoulders for any sign of a vehicle. As I approached mile marker 397, I slowed down further, my spotlight sweeping across the roadside. Nothing. Just empty plains and the occasional fence post marking property lines. Then I saw it. Headlights angled downward off the right shoulder, maybe 30 feet from the road. They were on, bright white beams cutting through the darkness, illuminating a patch of scrub grass and frozen earth. As I got closer, I could make out the shape of the vehicle, a dark sedan, possibly a Honda or Toyota, sitting at an odd angle with the front end lower than the rear. It looked like it had slid off the road and gotten stuck. Not a violent crash, but enough to leave it stranded. I pulled onto the shoulder about 20 yards behind it, activated my light bar, and radioed in. Dispatch, Unit 47 on scene at mile marker 398. I've got a vehicle off the roadway, appears occupied, headlights on. I'm going to investigate. Copy, 47. Trooper Millard is now 30 minutes out. Advise if you need emergency medical. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped out into the cold. The temperature had dropped again, not as severely as that night 3 weeks ago, but enough to make my breath visible. I approached the vehicle slowly, keeping my flashlight trained on the interior. The driver's side window was fogged up, but I could make out a shape in the front seat. Someone was definitely inside. Montana Highway Patrol, I called out, tapping on the window with my flashlight. Are you all right in there? No response. I tried the door handle. Locked. I moved to the passenger side, shining my light through the window. The interior was a mess. Fast food wrappers on the floor, a jacket thrown across the back seat, a phone charger dangling from the cigarette lighter. And in the driver's seat, slumped against the steering wheel, was a woman. She looked to be in her 30s, dark hair pulled back in a ponytail, wearing a thick winter coat. Her eyes were closed and I couldn't tell if she was breathing. I tried the passenger door, also locked. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" I shouted, banging harder on the window. Still nothing. I made a quick decision, returned to my cruiser, and grabbed the window punch from my emergency kit. Back at the sedan, I shattered the passenger window with one strike, reached in and unlocked the door. The smell that hit me when I opened it was immediate and wrong. Not the sharp metallic smell of blood or the sickly sweet smell of death, but something else. Cold, stale air mixed with exhaust fumes. Carbon monoxide. I yanked the driver's door open from the inside and immediately checked for a pulse. There, faint but present. She was alive, barely. I radioed dispatch urgently. Unit 47, I've got a female, approximately 30s, unconscious, possible carbon monoxide poisoning. I need immediate EMS to my location. Copy, 47. Ambulance dispatched from Malta, ETA 25 minutes. 25 minutes. That might be too long. I pulled the woman out of the vehicle and laid her on the cold ground, checking her airway and starting rescue breathing. Her skin was pale, lips slightly blue, and she wasn't responding to stimuli. As I worked, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The exhaust pipe on the sedan wasn't blocked. There was no snowpack, no debris, nothing that would cause fumes to back up into the car. And when I checked the tailpipe with my flashlight, I could see it was clear, the engine idling normally. But the smell inside the car had been unmistakable. Carbon monoxide doesn't have a smell, I knew that, but the effects were real. This woman was dying from something, and I couldn't figure out what. I kept up the rescue breathing, counting compressions, waiting for any sign of response. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 2 minutes, she gasped, a deep, shuddering breath that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside. Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused and confused. "Stay with me," I said, keeping my voice calm and steady. "You're going to be okay. Ambulance is on the way." She looked at me, but it was like she was looking through me, past me, at something I couldn't see. Her lips moved, forming words I had to lean in close to hear. "He told me to wait," she whispered. "Said someone would come. Said I just had to wait in the car with the engine running." My skin prickled. "Who told you that?" Her eyes focused slightly, gaining a clarity that was almost more disturbing than the confusion. "The trooper. He said there was an accident up ahead, and I needed to wait while he checked it out. He told me to keep the engine on so I wouldn't freeze. That was..." She paused, trying to remember. "That was hours ago. I fell asleep. I felt ice forming in my stomach. What did this trooper look like?" She closed her eyes, struggling to recall. "Older, maybe 50. Tall. He was wearing a uniform like yours, but different. The hat was different. And his car, it looked old, like from a movie." Before I could ask anything else, headlights appeared in the distance. The ambulance arriving faster than expected. But as it got closer, I realized it wasn't an ambulance. It was another patrol car, and the unit number on the side made my heart skip. Unit 23. The cruiser pulled up behind mine and stopped, engine idling, emergency lights off. I stood up slowly, instinctively moving between the woman and the vehicle. The driver's door opened, and a figure stepped out. He was tall, wearing a Montana Highway Patrol uniform that looked decades out of date. The Stetson, the cut of the jacket, even the way he wore his duty belt. Everything was wrong for current regulations. And his face, I couldn't see it clearly in the darkness, but something about it made me not want to look directly at it. "Trooper," the figure said, his voice flat and emotionless. "I can take it from here. You should return to patrol." I didn't move. My hand dropped to my service weapon, though I wasn't sure what good it would do. "Identify yourself, name, and unit number." The figure tilted its head, a movement that was too precise, too measured. "Unit 23, Trooper Holloway, I was responding to the same call. The female is my responsibility now. The woman on the ground stirred, trying to sit up. I crouched down, keeping my eyes on the figure. "Stay down," I told her quietly. "Don't move." "She needs medical attention," the figure continued, taking a step forward. "Transport to Malta Hospital. I'll handle the paperwork." Another step. "You should leave, Trooper Whitlow. This isn't your call anymore." It knew my name. The temperature dropped suddenly, drastically, and I could see frost forming on my vehicle, on the woman's jacket, on the ground around us. My breath came out in thick white clouds, and my fingers started to go numb. The figure took another step, and I could finally see its face in the glow of my headlights. It was Holloway, or what was left of him. The features were there, but wrong, like a photograph that had been left out in the sun too long. The edges were blurred, the colors faded, and the eyes were empty. Dark voids that reflected no light. "Stop right there," I ordered, drawing my weapon. "Don't come any closer." The figure stopped, but that empty smile widened. "You can't help her, Whitlow. She waited too long, just like the others. They all wait, and they all follow, and they all end up feeding the road." Behind me, I heard the real ambulance approaching, its siren cutting through the night. The figure looked past me toward the sound, and for just a moment, something like frustration crossed its blurred features. "You've interfered," it said quietly. "The pattern is broken." Then it turned and walked back toward the Phantom Cruiser, movements jerky and unnatural. It climbed inside, closed the door, and the vehicle simply vanished. Not driving away, not fading, just gone in an instant. The ambulance pulled up seconds later, followed closely by Trooper Millard in her patrol car. The EMTs jumped out and immediately began working on the woman, loading her onto a stretcher and into the back of the ambulance. Millard approached me, her young face creased with concern. "Whitlow, you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." I almost laughed at that, but it came out as more of a choke, something like that. "Did you see the other patrol car when you pulled up?" She shook her head, confused. "What other patrol car? It was just you in the ambulance." I didn't answer. I just watched as they loaded the woman into the ambulance and drove away, sirens wailing. Millard stayed with me while I processed the scene, took photos of the sedan, measured skid marks that didn't make sense because there weren't any. The car had simply rolled to a stop off the shoulder, as if the driver had been instructed to pull over and wait. We found her purse in the back seat, ID showing her name as Sarah Kemper, address in Billings. There was nothing else unusual about the vehicle. No mechanical problems, no reason for her to have stopped, except that someone had told her to. When the tow truck arrived an hour later, driven by Ephraim Talmadge, he took one look at my face and knew. It happened again. I nodded. Holloway, or whatever's wearing his face, it tried to take her. Ephraim walked around the sedan, examining it with professional detachment, but I could see the tension in his shoulders. "How'd you stop it?" I shook my head. I didn't. The ambulance showed up, broke whatever hold it had. But Ephraim, it knew my name, and it said something about feeding the road. He stopped walking and looked at me. There's an old trucker legend about this stretch of highway. Goes back to before US 2 was even paved. They say the road is hungry, that it needs to take a certain number of people every year to keep running smooth. Accidents, breakdowns, disappearances, doesn't matter how, just that it gets its due. Most folks chalk it up to superstition, the kind of stories you tell in truck stops to pass the time. But what if there's something to it? What if whatever took Holloway all those years ago is still out here, still trying to feed? I looked out at the empty highway, stretching endlessly in both directions, and felt that weight settling back onto my shoulders. Then we've got a problem, because it's not going to stop. Ephraim nodded slowly. No, it's not. Question is, what are we going to do about it? We stood there in the cold. Two men with badges and responsibilities facing something that didn't care about jurisdiction or procedure or any of the rules we'd built our lives around. And I realized that the only thing we could do was keep patrolling, keep responding to calls, keep trying to save the ones we could, because that's what the job was, standing between people and the darkness, even when the darkness wore a uniform just like yours. Miller drove me back to the station after my shift ended, neither of us speaking much. She'd seen the look on my face, the way my hands shook slightly when I filled out the incident report. She was smart enough not to ask questions she didn't want answered. When we pulled into the lot, Sergeant Brickman was waiting, standing by the door with a cup of coffee and that expression that said he already knew what had happened. He pulled me aside into his office and closed the door. "Sarah Kemper's going to be fine," he said, without preamble. "Hospital says she was suffering from hypothermia and mild hypoxia, but she'll make a full recovery. She told the doctors a state trooper pulled her over and told her to wait in her car. Said he seemed nice, professional, but she couldn't remember his face clearly, just his uniform and the old patrol car." He paused. "She also said you saved her life. That if you hadn't shown up when you did, she would have just kept waiting." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. Brickman set his coffee down and pulled out that same worn file folder from 3 weeks ago. I did some more digging into Holloway's disappearance. Found something interesting. In the weeks before he vanished, he'd responded to 3 separate calls on that stretch of highway. All of them reports of stranded motorists. All of them turned out to be nothing. Just empty road. The last call he responded to was the one he didn't come back from. He opened the folder and pulled out a grainy photograph, a still from a dash cam. This was taken from another trooper's car, 2 days after Holloway disappeared. Look at the date stamp. I looked. The date was correct, February 1983, 2 days after Holloway's last known location. But in the background of the image, barely visible on the shoulder, was a patrol car with its lights on. Unit 23. "He's been out there this whole time," I said quietly. "Still responding to calls, still trying to do his job. But something's wrong with him now. Something changed him." Brickman took the photo back. "Or something's using him. Using his face, his uniform, his dedication, making him part of the trap." "What do we do?" I asked, the same question I'd asked Ephraim. Brickman's answer was different. "We keep detailed records. Every sighting, every encounter, every report. We build a case file so thick that eventually somebody higher up has to pay attention, and in the meantime, we don't let it take anyone else. We respond fast, we bring backup, and we don't follow the lights." He stood up, signaling the end of the conversation. "Get some rest, Whitlow. You've earned it. But when you come back, you're going back out on the high line, because now you know what to look for, and that makes you valuable." I left his office feeling the weight of responsibility settling deeper. I wasn't just patrolling a highway anymore. I was standing watch over something older and darker than I'd ever imagined. And the worst part was knowing that Holloway had probably felt the same way, right up until the moment the road claimed him. As I drove home through the gray morning light, I made a promise to myself. Whatever was out there, whatever was wearing Holloway's face and trying to feed victims to the High Line, it wasn't going to get me. And it wasn't going to get anyone else if I could help it. But even as I made that promise, I knew it was one I might not be able to keep. Because the road was patient, and the darkness was hungry, and sooner or later everyone who patrols the High Line faces a call they can't come back from. I just had to make sure that when my call came, I was ready. Or at least as ready as anyone could be. The next 6 weeks were the longest of my career. I spent every shift on the High Line, patrolling that same stretch of US 2 between Havre and Malta, watching for the lights, waiting for the next call that would pull me back into that frozen darkness. Sergeant Brickman had partnered me with Trooper Millard for most of the shifts, a decision that made sense from a safety standpoint but created its own tension. She knew something had happened out there, something beyond what I'd written in my reports, but she was smart enough not to push. We drove in companionable silence most nights, our radios tuned to the same frequency, our eyes scanning the same empty highway. During those weeks, I started keeping my own records, separate from the official reports. Every strange call, every unexplained light, every moment when the temperature dropped without warning. I documented times, locations, weather conditions, moon phases, anything that might establish a pattern. What I found disturbed me more than I wanted to admit. The incidents weren't random. They occurred in clusters, mostly during new moon phases when the darkness was absolute, and they always happened between 2200 and 300 hours, the coldest, emptiest part of the night. And they were getting more frequent. It was the third week of April when everything came to a head. Spring had technically arrived, but winter still held Montana in its grip, sending late-season snowstorms rolling across the plains with bitter regularity. I was working alone that night. Millard had called in sick with the flu, and dispatch couldn't find a replacement on short notice. Brickman had approved it reluctantly, with strict orders to maintain regular radio contact and to call for backup at the first sign of anything unusual. I'd agreed, though we both knew that if something happened out on the High Line, backup might not arrive in time to matter. The shift started quiet. I rolled out of Havre at 1800 hours, under a sky heavy with clouds that promised snow before midnight. The highway was nearly empty. Just a few long-haul trucks making their way east toward North Dakota and the occasional local heading home from work. I ran my usual route, checking the truck stops and rest areas, making sure the parking lots were clear and the facilities secure. Everything was normal, routine, exactly the way I liked it. But as the sun set and darkness crept across the plains, I felt that familiar tension building in my chest. Tonight was going to be different. I could feel it in the air, in the way the wind seemed to carry voices just below the threshold of hearing. At 1:47 hours, my radio crackled. Tess Reddick's voice strained and urgent. Unit 47, dispatch. We've got a 10 to 50 reported at mile marker 405, eastbound US 2. Multiple callers reporting a vehicle on fire, possible occupants still inside. Can you respond? My hands tightened on the wheel. Mile marker 405, 7 miles past where I'd found Sarah Kemper. Deep in the heart of the pattern zone. Unit 47 copy. I'm 12 minutes out. Advise fire and EMS. There was a pause, longer than it should have been. Calder, Tess said, dropping the professional protocol. Multiple callers means this one's real, but be careful. One of the callers said the vehicle looked old, like a classic car, and they said the flames were blue. Blue flames. That wasn't gasoline, that wasn't natural. I pushed the accelerator down, my light bar illuminating the highway in pulses of red and blue. Copy, dispatch. I'm proceeding with caution. Keep the line open. The miles ticked by slowly, each one feeling like 10. The snow had started, small flakes at first, then heavier, cutting visibility down to maybe 100 yards. And then I saw it. A glow in the distance, bright and wrong, casting shadows that seemed to move against the wind. As I got closer, I could see the source. A vehicle engulfed in flames sitting in the middle of the eastbound lane. But Tess had been right. The flames were blue. An electric, unnatural blue that hurt to look at directly. I pulled up about 50 yards short and activated my spotlight. The burning vehicle was old, a sedan from the 1980s, boxy and angular. Even through the flames, I could make out the paint scheme. Montana Highway Patrol colors, Unit 23. My mouth went dry. I keyed the radio with shaking hands. Dispatch, Unit 47. I've got a vehicle fully involved. Confirm it's a patrol car, Unit 23. No signs of occupants from my position. Fire appears to be non-standard. Recommend extreme caution for responding units. Copy, 47. Fire department is 15 minutes out. Do you see anyone in or around the vehicle? I bathed my binoculars and scanned the burning cruiser. The interior was completely engulfed. Flames licking through the shattered windows, consuming the seats and dashboard. But there was no driver, no body slumped over the wheel. Just empty space filled with that impossible blue fire. Negative on occupants. Vehicle appears abandoned. I set the binoculars down and made a decision. I had to get closer, had to see if there were any clues, anything that would help me understand what was happening. I pulled on my gloves, grabbed my fire extinguisher from the trunk, and approached on foot. The heat hit me when I was still 20 feet away. Not the searing intensity of a normal car fire, but a deep, penetrating cold that masqueraded as warmth. It felt like frostbite and fever at the same time, and I had to force myself to keep walking. As I got closer, I could see details through the flames. The radio still mounted to the dashboard, melting and warping. The steering wheel twisted into an unnatural shape. And something else, something that made me stop dead in my tracks. There was writing on the hood, scratched deep into the metal, visible even through the flames. Names, dozens of names, carved in rough letters. I recognized some of them from the old case files. Missing persons, unsolved disappearances, people who'd vanished along this stretch of highway over the past 40 years. And at the bottom, freshly carved, still smoking. Vance Holloway. I stepped back, my mind racing. This wasn't just a patrol car. This was a memorial, or a warning. The flames began to die down, not gradually, but all at once, snuffing out as if someone had thrown a switch. The vehicle sat there, charred and smoking, but structurally intact. And that's when I heard footsteps behind me. Slow, measured, boots on pavement. I turned, my hand dropping to my weapon, and there he was. Trooper Holloway, or what was left of him. He looked different this time. More solid, more real, but also more wrong. His uniform was burned in places, the fabric charred and melted to his skin. His face was clearer now, no longer blurred and indistinct, and I could see the anguish etched into every line. He stopped about 10 feet away, close enough that I could see his eyes. They were human eyes, terrified and desperate, trapped inside something that was no longer entirely human. "Whitlow," he said, and his voice was different too. Less flat, more emotional, tinged with something that might have been hope, or might have been despair. "You keep coming back. You keep interfering." I kept my hand on my weapon but didn't draw. "I'm doing my job, same as you did." A bitter laugh escaped him, more of a choke than anything else. "My job? Is that what you think this is?" He gestured at the burned cruiser, at himself, at the empty highway. "I was doing my job when it took me, responding to a call, trying to help, and then I was just gone. Not dead, not alive, just gone. Stuck here, repeating the same patrol over and over, trying to fill a quota I don't understand." "What took you?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. "What is this?" He shook his head slowly. "The road, the land, something older than both. It feeds on loneliness, isolation, the cold spaces between towns where people are most vulnerable. and it needs servants to help it feed. I didn't want this. I fought it for as long as I could, but eventually you stop fighting. Eventually, you just do what it wants because it's easier than resisting. The people you've taken, I said, thinking of Sarah Kemper, of all the names carved into that hood. Are they gone? Are they dead? Holloway's expression twisted into something painful. Some are, some aren't. Some are like me, caught in between, serving the road in their own ways. The pattern needs to continue. 3 every winter. That's the price for keeping the highway clear, for preventing worse accidents, worse losses. 3 lives to save dozens. It's a bargain, Whitlow. A terrible bargain, but a bargain nonetheless. I felt sick. That's not how this works. We don't trade lives. We don't make deals with whatever this is. He took a step closer, and I could smell burning flesh, old and persistent. Then you'll fail. You'll fight and struggle, and eventually you'll end up just like me. Or you'll be smart and stop patrolling this sector. Let someone else carry the burden. Someone who doesn't know what they're walking into. He was giving me an out. A chance to walk away, to request a transfer, to leave the High Line to whatever darkness claimed it. And for a moment, just a moment, I considered it. Then I thought about Sarah Kemper, lying in that hospital bed, telling me I'd saved her life. I thought about all the people who drove this highway every day, unaware of what watched them from the darkness. And I thought about the oath I'd taken to protect and serve, not to run when things got difficult. No, I said firmly. I'm not leaving, and I'm not letting it take anyone else. Holloway's expression shifted, something that might have been pride or might have been pity. Then you'd better be ready, because it knows you now. It's watched you interfere 3 times, and it's patient, Whitlow. It has all the time in the world. You have 1 life, 1 career, 1 span of years before you retire or quit or die. It has forever. The snow was falling harder now, and I could hear sirens in the distance. The fire department finally arriving. Holloway looked toward the sound, and something in his posture changed, became more rigid, less human. They're coming. I have to go. But Whitlow, remember this. Every person you save, the road will try to take another. You're not winning this fight. You're just delaying the inevitable. He turned and walked back toward the burned cruiser, his movements becoming more mechanical with each step. He climbed inside through the missing door, sat in the driver's seat that should have been too hot to touch, and placed his hands on the warped steering wheel. The blue flames erupted again, consuming him and the vehicle, and within seconds both were gone, just empty highway and falling snow. The fire trucks arrived, followed by Ephraim in his tow rig and 2 sheriff's deputies I didn't recognize. They found me standing in the middle of the road, staring at the spot where Unit 23 had been. There was no debris, no scorch marks, nothing to indicate a vehicle had been there at all. The only evidence was my own testimony and the dashcam footage from my cruiser, which later review would show nothing but me standing alone on an empty highway, talking to no one. I filed my report, detailed and complete, knowing it would be filed away with all the others. Brickman read it, nodded once, and added it to the folder that was getting thicker by the week. "You saw him," he said. It wasn't a question. I nodded. "He's still in there, still aware, but he's not in control anymore. Whatever has him, it's using him to justify what it does. 3 lives every winter," he said. "A quota." Brickman was quiet for a long moment. "We've averaged 3 disappearances or fatal accidents on that stretch every winter for the past 40 years. I always thought it was just statistics, dangerous road conditions, bad luck. But if there's a pattern, if something's enforcing it..." He trailed off, unwilling or unable to finish the thought. "What do we do?" I asked, the same question I'd asked too many times. This time, Brickman's answer was different. "We document everything. We respond to every call, no matter how suspicious. We save everyone we can, and we accept that sometimes, despite our best efforts, the road will take what it wants." It wasn't the answer I wanted, but it was the only honest one. I went back on patrol the next night and the night after that. Spring eventually arrived for real, melting the snow and warming the air, and the incident stopped. The lights didn't appear, the temperature didn't drop, and the calls from mile marker 405 ceased entirely. It was as if the road had gone dormant, satisfied with whatever it had taken during the long winter months, but I knew it was temporary. Come November, when the temperature dropped and the first snows fell, it would wake again, and I would be there patrolling the same stretch of highway, watching for the same lights. Sarah Kemper sent me a letter in June. She'd recovered fully and wanted to thank me for saving her life. She'd moved to Billings, taken a job in an office where she'd never have to drive the High Line again. She said she still had nightmares about the trooper who'd told her to wait, about the feeling of cold seeping into her bones while she sat in that car. But she was alive, and that was what mattered. I kept the letter in my locker, a reminder of why I did this job. Not for the glory or the paycheck, but for moments like that, for the ones we saved. Trooper Millard and I developed a routine over the following months. We'd patrol the High Line together, maintaining regular radio contact even when we were in separate vehicles. We'd check in on each other, make sure neither of us was following strange lights or responding to calls that felt wrong. It helped, having someone who understood, even if we never talked about it directly. Some nights, usually when the moon was dark and the wind was high, we'd both see things. Flickers of light in our peripheral vision, shadows that moved wrong, the brief impression of a patrol car that shouldn't be there. But we'd learn to recognize them for what they were. Echoes, fragments, pieces of Holloway and the others trapped in the road's hunger. I'm still out here, still patrolling US 2, still watching the High Line. It's been 8 months since that night in April, and winter is coming around again. The temperature's dropping, the snow is starting to fall, and I can feel it waking up. That old hunger, that patient darkness, preparing for another season. Dispatch has already started getting calls about lights on the highway, about vehicles that shouldn't be there, and I know, with a certainty that keeps me up at night, that eventually one of those calls will be mine. Eventually, the road will come for me the way it came for Holloway. But until that day, I'll keep driving. I'll keep responding to calls, keep pulling people out of wrecked cars, keep standing between the darkness and everyone who doesn't know it's there. Because that's what we do. We're Montana Highway Patrol. We watch the roads, even the ones that watch back. And if the High Line wants to take me, it's going to have to work for it. I'm not going quietly into that frozen darkness. I'm not becoming another name carved into the hood of a phantom cruiser. Last week, I drove past mile marker 401 during the day, when the sun was high and the road was clear. I pulled over and walked into the field where I'd first seen the footprints, where I'd heard that voice calling from the darkness. In the daylight, it looked harmless. Just empty prairie, dead grass, and frozen earth. But I knew what it became at night. I knew what waited out there, patient and hungry, marking time until the next call, the next victim, the next quota. I stood there for a long time, listening to the wind and watching the highway, and I made a promise. Not to myself, but to Holloway, to all of them. I'd remember. I'd keep their names alive. I'd make sure the pattern was documented, the evidence preserved, the truth recorded somewhere that couldn't be buried or ignored. And maybe, someday, someone smarter than me would figure out how to break it. How to free the ones who were trapped. How to starve the thing that fed on isolation and cold. Until then, I'd do my job. I'd patrol my sector, I'd answer my calls, and I'd save everyone I could, knowing that some nights, despite everything, the road would still take its due. That's the thing about the High Line that nobody tells you. It's not just a highway, it's a hunting ground, and every trooper who patrols it is both hunter and prey, standing watch over something that's been feeding for longer than any of us have been alive. You can quit, you can transfer, you can run away and pretend you never saw the lights or heard the voices. But someone has to stay. Someone has to keep watching. And I guess, for now, that someone is me. The snow is falling again tonight. Thick, heavy flakes that turn the highway into a tunnel of white. My radio is quiet, but I know it won't stay that way. Somewhere out there, between the mile markers and the darkness, something is waking up. Something is getting ready to make another call, to pull another traveler off the road, to add another name to a list that keeps growing year after year. And when that call comes through, when dispatch sends me out into that frozen wasteland to respond, I'll go. Because that's what we do. We follow the lights, even when we know we shouldn't. Especially then. And we hope, against all reason and experience, that this time will be different. That this time we'll find survivors instead of victims, answers instead of mysteries, an end instead of another beginning. But deep down, in the part of me that's seen too much and understands too little, I know the truth. The road never gives answers. It only takes. And sooner or later, it takes everyone. My radio crackles. Tess Reddick's voice calm and professional. Unit 47, dispatch. We've got a report of hazard lights. US 2 eastbound, mile marker 402. Caller says it looks like an emergency vehicle. Can you respond? I pick up the mic, my thumb resting on the transmit button. Through my windshield, I can see nothing but snow and darkness, and the endless stretch of highway reaching toward a horizon I can't see. And somewhere out there, just beyond the reach of my headlights, I know the lights are already flickering. Red and blue, waiting for me to follow. I take a breath. Unit 47, copy. I'm en route. And I drive east into the storm, toward the lights that never stop calling, on a highway that never stops taking, carrying the weight of everyone I've saved and everyone I couldn't. This is the High Line. This is my patrol. This is where the road watches back. And tonight, like every night, I'm going to answer the call, even though I know, somewhere deep in my bones, that one of these nights I won't be coming back. Just like Holloway. Just like all the others whose names are carved into metal that burns with blue flames and disappears into legend. But that's tomorrow's problem. Tonight, there's someone out there who needs help. And I'm still a Montana Highway Patrol trooper. So I drive into the darkness, into the cold, into whatever's waiting. Because that's what we do. That's all we can do. And maybe, just maybe, it'll be enough. My name is Rowan Culpepper, and I've been a Montana Highway Patrol trooper for 9 years. Most of that time has been spent on the Beartooth Highway, the stretch of US 212 that climbs from Red Lodge up through the mountains and into Wyoming. It's one of the most beautiful roads in America during summer, when tourists come from all over the world to drive the switchbacks and photograph the alpine meadows. But in winter, when the pass closes and the snow piles 15 feet deep, it becomes something else entirely. It becomes mine to watch over, mine to secure, mine to patrol during those brief windows when the weather allows. And it was during one of those patrols that I found something that still haunts my sleep. The Beartooth closes officially around mid-October, depending on when the first major snow hits. After that, the gates go up at both ends, and the road becomes off-limits until late May or early June. But closing a road and keeping people off it are two different things. Every winter, we get snowmobilers who ignore the warnings, backcountry skiers looking for fresh powder, and the occasional idiot who thinks their four-wheel drive is invincible. Most of them turn back when they see how bad conditions really are. Some don't. And every few years we have to mount a rescue operation for someone who got in over their head and couldn't get back out. That's why we do periodic patrols during winter, even when the road is officially closed. We check the gates, look for signs of unauthorized entry, and make sure nobody's stuck up there dying of exposure. It was the second week of November, early in the closure season, when I got the assignment. A rancher named May Ketteridge, who lived near the eastern gate, had called in reporting she'd seen headlights up on the pass the night before, moving slowly like someone was driving the closed road. Dispatch wanted me to run up there, check the gate for tampering, and make sure nobody was stranded. Standard winter patrol, nothing I hadn't done dozens of times before. I loaded my cruiser with extra cold weather gear, emergency blankets, a sat phone in case radio coverage failed, and enough supplies to spend a night up there if needed. The forecast was clear for the next 24 hours, which in November meant I had maybe a 6-hour window before conditions could change without warning. I rolled out around 0800 hours, taking the highway east from Red Lodge toward the closure gate. The lower elevations were clear, just patchy snow and gray skies, but I could see the heavy cloud cover hanging over the mountains like a warning. May Ketteridge was waiting at her ranch house when I passed, waving me down. She was in her 70s, tough as boot leather, the kind of woman who'd lived through Montana winters that would kill most people. I pulled into her driveway and rolled down my window. "Morning, May. You the one who called in about the headlights?" She nodded, her weathered face creased with concern. "Last night, around 2100 hours, I was closing up the barn and saw them up on the pass, maybe around the first big switchback. They were moving real slow, stop and go, like someone was lost or stuck. I figured it was some tourist who ignored the closure signs." She paused, looking up at the mountains. "But here's the thing, Trooper. Those lights, they were wrong. Too high off the ground and too bright. Not like regular headlights, more like, I don't know, spotlights maybe, or something else." I made a note on my pad. "Did you see them come back down?" She shook her head. "Watched for about 20 minutes, then the clouds moved in, and I lost sight. But they never came back past my place, and this is the only way down unless you got a helicopter." That was true. The Beartooth was a dead end in winter. If someone had driven up there, they were either still up there, or they'd turned around above May's line of sight. Either way, I needed to check it out. I thanked her and continued up the road. The closure gate was about 3 miles past her ranch. A heavy steel barrier stretched across both lanes with warning signs every 50 feet. Road closed, no winter maintenance. Travel at your own risk. Most people got the message. When I reached the gate, I immediately saw the problem. The chain that secured it had been cut, not with bolt cutters, but with something that left a clean, almost melted edge. The gate itself was pushed open just wide enough for a vehicle to squeeze through. Fresh tire tracks led up the mountain, partially filled with overnight snow but still visible. Someone had definitely gone up there, and recently. I radioed it in. "Dispatch, Unit 31. I'm at the eastern Beartooth Gate. Gate's been breached, chain cut, fresh tracks leading up the pass. I'm going to investigate." The dispatcher, a young guy named Marcus I didn't know well, responded immediately. "Copy, Unit 31. Be advised weather's turning. Storm front moving in faster than forecast. You've got maybe 4 hours before conditions deteriorate." 4 hours. That was enough time to get up to the first overlook, check for stranded vehicles, and get back down. Probably. "Understood. I'll maintain radio contact." I pulled my cruiser through the gate and started up the mountain. The Beartooth in winter is a different world. The road that carries thousands of tourists in summer becomes a narrow track through an alien landscape of ice and stone. The shoulders disappear under snowdrifts, the guardrails vanish beneath white mounds, and the drop-offs that are merely dramatic in summer become absolutely lethal. One wrong move, one patch of black ice, and you're tumbling down a mountainside with no hope of survival. I've pulled bodies out of those ravines. I've seen what happens when people underestimate this road. So I drove slowly, carefully, following the tire tracks that led steadily upward. The first switchback came after about 2 miles. The tracks continued through it without hesitation, which told me whoever was driving knew what they were doing. They weren't sliding around or overcorrecting. They were maintaining a steady, controlled pace. That was good. It meant they probably weren't panicking or inexperienced. But it also raised questions. If they were experienced enough to handle the road in these conditions, why come up here in the first place? The tracks led me higher, through the second and third switchbacks, climbing steadily toward the alpine zone where trees gave way to bare rock and endless wind. The temperature dropped with each 100 feet of elevation, and I could see my breath fogging inside the cruiser despite the heater running full blast. At the fourth switchback, something changed. The tracks suddenly swerved right off the road and toward the guardrail. I stopped and got out to investigate. The guardrail was damaged here. Several posts bent outward as if something had hit them hard. But there was no debris, no broken glass or scattered parts, and the tracks didn't go over the edge. Instead, they continued parallel to the guardrail for about 20 feet, then angled back onto the road and kept climbing. It looked like the vehicle had deliberately driven off the road, scraped along the guardrail, then returned to the pavement. I walked to the edge and looked over. The drop here was maybe 200 feet, steep but not quite vertical, ending in a boulder field covered with snow. No vehicle down there, no signs of a crash, just empty white space and rocks. I photographed the scene and continued up. The tracks were getting harder to follow now as the wind picked up and began filling them with fresh snow. I was at about 9,000 feet elevation, and the air was thin enough to make me slightly lightheaded. The road here ran along the side of a massive cliff face, with the mountain rising straight up on the left and falling away into nothing on the right. This was one of the most exposed sections of the highway, completely unprotected from the weather, and I could feel the wind buffeting my cruiser with each gust. The clouds had dropped lower, wrapping around the peaks above me, and I knew I was running out of time. Then I saw it, a vehicle, parked sideways across the road about a quarter-mile ahead. I slowed down, activating my light bar and spotlight. As I got closer, I could make out details. It was a pickup truck, dark blue or black, older model, maybe early 2000s, Montana plates. It was sitting at an angle with the driver's door hanging open and the engine running. I could see exhaust vapors rising from the tailpipe, white against the gray sky. But there was no driver visible, no movement, nothing. I pulled up about 30 feet behind it and radioed in. Dispatch, Unit 31. I've located a vehicle at approximately mile marker 16, abandoned with engine running and door open. I'm going to investigate. Stand by. I stepped out into the wind, and it nearly knocked me over. The temperature had to be below zero with the wind chill, and the exposed skin on my face felt like it was being scraped with razor blades. I pulled my balaclava up and approached the truck carefully, one hand on my weapon. "Montana Highway Patrol," I called out, though the wind tore the words away almost before they left my mouth. "If anyone's here, make yourself known." No response. I reached the driver's door and looked inside. The interior was empty. No driver, no passengers, no sign of struggle. The keys were in the ignition. The heater was running, and there was a half-empty coffee cup in the center console, still steaming. On the passenger seat was a road atlas, old and worn, open to a page showing Montana. But something was wrong with the map. The roads were in the right places, but the names were different, or missing entirely. And there were markings in red pen, circles and crosses and notes in handwriting I couldn't quite read. I didn't touch it. Not yet. First, I needed to find the driver. I walked around the truck looking for footprints and found them immediately. They led away from the vehicle toward the uphill side of the road, where a narrow gap in the rock face looked like it might be an old service road or trail. The prints were clear in the fresh snow. Boot treads, size that suggested a male, average height. They led straight toward the gap without wavering, like the person knew exactly where they were going. I followed them, climbing over a snowbank and squeezing through the gap in the rocks. On the other side was something I'd never seen before, and I'd patrolled this road for 9 years. It was a road, or what was left of one, an old narrow track that ran parallel to the main highway, carved into the cliff face about 15 feet higher. It wasn't on any map I'd ever seen, wasn't marked on any of our patrol documents. The surface was cracked asphalt, ancient and broken, with chunks missing and weeds growing through the gaps. But that wasn't the strangest part. The strangest part was that despite the snow falling all around me, the old road was completely clear, not a flake on it, just dry, bare asphalt disappearing around a curve ahead. The footprints led onto this road and continued following it. I hesitated. Every instinct told me this was wrong, that I should go back to the truck, call for backup, wait for more units to arrive. But the footprints were fresh, maybe 30 minutes old, and if someone was up here lost or injured, I didn't have time to wait. I keyed my radio. Dispatch, Unit 31. I'm following footprints from the abandoned vehicle. They lead to what appears to be an old service road, unmapped. I'm proceeding on foot. Will advise in 15 minutes. Static, just static. I tried again. Dispatch, Unit 31, do you copy? More static, with something underneath it. A sound like wind, or voices, or both. My radio was dead, or the signal was blocked by the rock. I was on my own. I pulled out my sat phone and checked it. No signal. That shouldn't be possible. Sat phones worked almost anywhere. But the screen just showed searching, with no bars. I was completely cut off. The smart thing would have been to turn back, but I could still see the footprints, still clear in front of me, and I convinced myself I'd just follow them a little further, just around that curve, just to see where they went. I started walking. The old road was eerily smooth under my boots. No ice, no snow, just solid asphalt that felt somehow warm despite the freezing temperature. The wind that had been howling a moment ago had died to nothing, and the silence was absolute. I couldn't hear the main highway anymore, couldn't hear my own cruiser's engine, couldn't hear anything except my own breathing and the soft crunch of my boots on the road. I walked for what felt like 5 minutes, but might have been longer. Time seemed strange here, and rounded the curve. The road continued ahead, but now it was running alongside something that made my stomach drop. A cliff, but not the cliff face I'd been seeing from the main highway. This was different. The drop on my right was infinite, disappearing into gray nothing, like someone had cut away the entire mountainside and left only void. And the footprints I'd been following stopped. Just stopped, right in the middle of the road, as if the person had simply ceased to exist mid-stride. I stood there, staring at where the tracks ended, and felt the temperature begin to drop. Not gradually, but suddenly, like someone had opened a freezer door. My breath came out in thick clouds, and frost began forming on my jacket. That's when I heard it. A sound from further up the old road. Not footsteps, but something else. Something that might have been machinery, or might have been breathing. A low, rhythmic sound that seemed to come from the road itself. and beneath that, barely audible, a voice, calling my name. Culpepper. I drew my weapon, sweeping it towards the sound. Identify yourself, Montana Highway Patrol. The voice came again, closer now. Culpepper, you shouldn't be here. It wasn't coming from ahead of me. It was coming from behind. I spun around and saw him. A man standing in the middle of the road, maybe 20 feet away, wearing winter clothing that looked decades out of date. Heavy wool coat, old-style boots, a hat with ear flaps. His face was hard to see clearly, like looking at something through foggy glass. But I got the impression of middle age, weathered skin, eyes that were too dark. He wasn't walking, he was just there, standing motionless, and I couldn't remember seeing him approach. Who are you? I demanded, keeping my weapon trained on him. He tilted his head, studying me. I'm the one who's supposed to be here. The question is, who are you and why did you follow the prince? His voice was wrong, too flat without the natural variation of human speech. I'm looking for the driver of the vehicle back on the main road. Have you seen anyone else up here? The man, or whatever he was, didn't answer immediately. Instead, he raised one hand and pointed past me, up the road toward where the footprints had vanished. He went that way, followed the old path. They all do eventually. The road shows them and they follow and they never come back. What road? I asked, though I already knew the answer. The man smiled, and it was the most inhuman expression I'd ever seen. This one. The road that was here before, the road that should have stayed buried. Then he started walking toward me, slow, steady steps, and with each one the temperature dropped further. I backed away, keeping my weapon up. Stop, don't come any closer. He didn't stop, he just kept walking, and I realized with growing horror that his feet weren't quite touching the ground. He was floating, hovering maybe an inch above the pavement, gliding toward me with that terrible smile fixed on his face. I turned and ran back the way I'd come, back toward the gap in the rocks, back toward the main highway and my cruiser and anything that made sense. Behind me, I could hear that sound again. That rhythmic breathing machinery sound, growing louder, closer, accompanied by footsteps that weren't quite footsteps. I didn't look back. I just ran, slipping on nothing, my lungs burning in the thin air until I burst through the gap in the rocks and stumbled back onto the main highway. The wind hit me like a wall, the real wind, cold and brutal, and gloriously normal. I spun around, weapon still drawn, but the gap in the rocks was just a gap. No old road visible beyond it, no figure following. Just solid rock and falling snow. My radio crackled back to life. Unit 31, dispatch. We've lost contact for the last 20 minutes. What's your status? I lowered my weapon with shaking hands. Unit 31, I'm back at the abandoned vehicle. I lost radio contact temporarily. Investigating now. I didn't mention the old road, the floating man, the impossibility of what I'd just experienced. Not yet. I needed to think, needed to process, needed to understand what had just happened. But first I needed to deal with the truck still sitting in the middle of the highway with its door open and engine running. I approached it again, more cautiously this time, and looked inside. The coffee cup was gone. The road atlas was gone. The interior was completely empty, as if it had been cleaned out. Even the keys were missing from the ignition, though the engine was still running without keys in the ignition. That's when I noticed something I hadn't seen before. A small detail that made everything worse. The odometer. It showed 248,000 miles. But the truck looked old enough that it should have shown much more, or the odometer should have rolled over. I looked at the VIN plate on the dashboard and felt cold that had nothing to do with the weather. The year was listed as 1987, This truck was nearly 40 years old, but the tires were new, the paint was hardly faded, and it was running without keys. I backed away and radioed dispatch. Unit 31, I need a vehicle registration check. Montana plate number. I read off the numbers. There was a pause, then Marcus came back on. Unit 31, that plate isn't in our system. Are you sure you read it correctly? I double-checked. Affirmative. Plate number is correct. Another pause. Longer this time. Unit 31, I'm checking historical records. Stand by. I stood there in the wind and snow, staring at the impossible truck, while dispatch searched databases for a vehicle that shouldn't exist. Finally, Marcus came back, and his voice was uncertain. Unit 31, I found a record. That plate was issued to a vehicle reported missing in February 1987. Vehicle and driver never found. Case was closed as a probable accident on the Beartooth Highway. Driver's name was registered as Judd Fenwick. Judd Fenwick. A name I'd never heard, connected to a truck that had been missing for nearly 4 decades, now sitting in front of me with its engine running and its interior empty. I looked up at the gap in the rocks, at the place where the old road had been, and understood with creeping certainty that I'd just walked into something much older and stranger than a simple abandoned vehicle. Somewhere up that impossible road, Judd Fenwick was still walking, still following the tracks, still trying to find his way back. And he'd been doing it for 37 years. I stood beside Judd Fenwick's truck for a long time, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The engine continued its impossible idle, running without keys, burning fuel that should have been gone decades ago. Snow was starting to accumulate on the hood and roof, but the exhaust still poured from the tailpipe in steady white clouds. I circled the vehicle again, photographing everything with my phone, documenting the plate number, the VIN, the condition of the tires and body. Every detail I captured felt like evidence in a case I didn't understand, proof of something that shouldn't exist. The wind had picked up significantly, and the clouds had dropped so low I could barely see 50 yards in any direction. I needed to make a decision. Protocol said I should secure the vehicle, call for a tow, and get back down the mountain before conditions deteriorated further. But something about this situation demanded more. Judd Fenwick had been missing for 37 years, and his truck had just reappeared on the same stretch of highway where he'd vanished. That wasn't coincidence. That was a message, or a warning, or both. I keyed my radio again. Dispatch, Unit 31. I need county records to pull the original missing person file on Judd Fenwick, February 1987. Also need a supervisor callback when possible. Marcus responded promptly. Copy, Unit 31. I'll forward the request. Be advised, storm is intensifying. Road Department says you should return to base immediately. He was right, but I couldn't leave. Not yet. Understood, dispatch. I'm going to secure the vehicle and conduct a final area sweep. Then I'll head down. I clicked off before he could argue. The truck needed to be moved off the roadway, but I couldn't drive it without keys, and I wasn't about to call for a tow truck to come up here in these conditions. The best I could do was try to push it to the shoulder. I put the transmission in neutral and started pushing, leaning my weight against the tailgate. The truck didn't budge. I repositioned, tried again, putting everything I had into it. Still nothing. It was like the vehicle was welded to the pavement. I walked back to the driver's side and leaned in, looking for an emergency brake that might be engaged. That's when I noticed something I'd missed before. There was an indentation in the driver's seat, a depression in the fabric as if someone had been sitting there recently. And it was warm. Not hot, but noticeably warmer than the ambient temperature, as if body heat was still trapped in the material. I jerked my hand back instinctively, then forced myself to check again. The warmth was real, fading but present. Someone had been sitting here within the last few minutes, but I'd been standing right next to this truck. Nobody could have gotten out without me seeing them. Unless they'd gotten out while I was on the old road, while I was following the footprints, while I was being led away from the vehicle by whatever that entity was. I spun around, scanning the area, my hand dropping to my weapon. The highway was empty. The gap in the rocks that led to the old road was maybe 30 feet away, just a dark slash in the cliff face. I approached it slowly, keeping my back to the mountain, my eyes on that opening. When I reached it, I pulled out my flashlight and shined it through. Just rock, solid rock. No gap, no passage, no hidden road beyond. Just the natural cliff face, unmarked and impassable. But I'd been through there. I'd walked through that gap, squeezed between the rocks, emerged onto that impossible road. The marks on my jacket from scraping against the stone were still visible. I touched the rock face, half expecting my hand to pass through it, but it was solid, real, undeniably there. I backed away and returned to the truck, my mind racing. Either I'd hallucinated the entire experience, or something had deliberately lured me away from the vehicle and then sealed the passage behind me. Both options were equally disturbing. I photographed the rock face where the gap had been, documenting its solid appearance, then returned to my cruiser to warm up and think. The heater felt like salvation, and I held my hands up to the vents until feeling returned to my fingers. My phone showed I'd been up here for almost 2 hours, which didn't match my perception of time. It felt like maybe 45 minutes, an hour at most. I pulled up the photos I'd taken and scrolled through them. The truck from multiple angles, the VIN plate, the license plate, the rock face, all clear, all normal. Then I reached the photos I'd taken of the interior, and my stomach dropped. In the first few shots, the passenger seat was empty, as I remembered it. But in the last photo, the one I'd taken just before checking the driver's seat warmth, there was something there. Not the road atlas I'd seen earlier, but something else. A piece of paper, white and stark against the dark upholstery. I zoomed in, trying to make out details. It looked like a note, handwritten, but the resolution wasn't good enough to read the text. I got out of the cruiser and went back to the truck, opened the passenger door, and looked inside. The note was there, sitting exactly where my photo showed it, though I would have sworn on my badge that the seat had been empty moments ago. I pulled on my gloves and carefully picked it up. The paper was old, yellowed with age, and the ink had faded to a rust-brown color that might have been red once. The handwriting was shaky, like it had been written in a moving vehicle or by someone with an unsteady hand. It read, "The mile marker doesn't cast a shadow. When you see it, you'll understand. Don't follow the footprints. Don't trust the road. It shows you what you want to see until it's too late. I'm sorry I didn't listen. JF, Judd Fenwick." This was a message from Judd Fenwick, written God knows when, left God knows how. I read it 3 more times, trying to extract meaning from the cryptic phrases. A mile marker that doesn't cast a shadow. I'd passed dozens of mile markers on the way up here. Standard reflective signs marking distance and location. None of them had seemed unusual, but the note suggested there was one that was different, one that would somehow be significant. And the warning about footprints, about the road showing you what you want to see, that aligned exactly with what I'd experienced. The old road, the footprints that led nowhere, the entity that had appeared and disappeared. It had all been a lure, a trap, designed to pull me away from something or lead me toward something else. I bagged the note as evidence and returned to my cruiser. The storm was getting worse, snow falling so thick now that my wipers could barely keep up. I had maybe 30 minutes before the road became impassable, before I'd be forced to spend the night up here with Fenwick's ghost truck and whatever else haunted this mountain. I needed to get moving, but as I put the cruiser in gear, something caught my eye. A flash of light, brief and bright, from further up the road. I stopped, watching. It came again. Definitely a reflection of some kind. Like sunlight hitting metal or glass, but there was no sunlight, hadn't been for hours. The light was coming from somewhere else. I grabbed up at my radio. "Dispatch, Unit 31. I've got a possible second vehicle or structure up the road. I'm going to investigate briefly, then heading down." Marcus's voice came back immediately, strained with worry. "Negative, Unit 31. Weather's too severe. You need to descend now." He was right. This was stupid, dangerous against every rule in the book. But that flash of light, it felt important. It felt like an answer to a question I didn't even know I was asking. "Copy, dispatch. 5 minutes, then I'm heading down, I promise." I started up the road before he could respond, driving slowly through the deteriorating visibility. The flash came from about a quarter-mile up, near a wide section of road that served as an informal overlook in summer. As I approached, I could see what was causing it. Another vehicle, this one newer, a silver SUV with its hazard lights on, parked at an angle with the driver's side facing the cliff edge. Someone was standing beside it, waving their arms, trying to get my attention. Relief flooded through me. An actual person, an actual problem I could solve. I pulled up behind the SUV and got out, approaching cautiously but without the dread I'd felt at Fenwick's truck. "Montana Highway Patrol," I called out. "Are you all right?" The person was a man, maybe 40, wearing inadequate clothing for the conditions, just a light jacket and jeans. He was shivering violently, his face red with cold exposure. "Thank God," he said, his voice shaking. "I've been stuck up here for hours. My GPS said this road was open, and by the time I realized it wasn't, I couldn't turn around. The snow got too deep." I looked at his tires. They were summer tires, nearly bald, completely unsuitable for mountain winter conditions. "Sir, this road has been closed since mid-October. There are signs every quarter mile. How did you get past the gate?" He looked confused, genuinely puzzled by the question. "Gate? There wasn't any gate. The road was open. I mean, the snow was bad, but I thought I could make it through to Wyoming." I felt that familiar unease creeping back. "Sir, what's your name?" He seemed to struggle with the question, as if he had to think about it. "Dennis. Dennis Hargrove. I'm from Billings. I was heading to Cody for business." I nodded, trying to keep my expression neutral. "All right, Dennis. When did you come up here? What day is it?" He blinked at me. "It's Tuesday? No, Wednesday, November 6th. I left Billings this morning around 0700. Today was November 9th, and there was no way he'd been up here for 3 days without dying of exposure. Mr. Hargrove, I need you to come with me to my vehicle. We need to get you warm and get some information." He nodded eagerly and started toward my cruiser, but as he passed the front of his SUV, something strange happened. He flickered, like a light bulb losing power for just a fraction of a second. His outline blurred, became indistinct, then solidified again. He didn't seem to notice. He just kept walking toward my cruiser. I stayed where I was, watching him. "Mr. Hargrove, stop for a moment." He turned, that same confused expression on his face. "What's wrong?" I pointed at his vehicle. "I need to check your registration. Can you get it for me?" He hesitated, then nodded and walked back toward the SUV. As he reached for the driver's door, he flickered again, more pronounced this time. For a full second, he was translucent, barely there, and I could see through him to the mountain beyond. Then he solidified, pulled the door open, and leaned inside to search for papers. I keyed my radio, speaking quietly. "Dispatch, Unit 31. I need a welfare check and registration on a silver SUV, Montana plates." I read off the number from the rear of the vehicle. Marcus came back within seconds. "Unit 31. That plate is registered to a Dennis Hargrove, address in Billings. But Culpeper, that vehicle was reported abandoned on the Beartooth Highway in November 2019. 6 years ago. Hargrove was never found. 6 years ago. Dennis Hargrove had been missing for 6 years, and I was looking at him right now, watching him search his vehicle for registration papers, watching him flicker in and out of existence like a bad television signal. This wasn't a rescue. This was something else entirely. "Mr. Hargrove," I called out, keeping my voice steady. "Step away from the vehicle, please." He emerged with a folder in his hand, walking toward me with that same eager, relieved expression. "I found it. I've got my registration and insurance right here." As he got closer, I could see more details that were wrong. His jacket, which had seemed merely inadequate for the weather, was actually soaking wet, as if he'd been standing in rain. But it had been snowing, not raining. And his skin, which I'd thought was just red from cold, had a bluish tinge underneath, the color of advanced hypothermia or something worse. His eyes weren't quite focused, looking past me rather than at me. "Mr. Hargrove, I need you to tell me the truth. How long have you been up here?" He smiled, but it was wrong, too wide, too fixed. "I told you. Since this morning. I just got turned around in the snow." "It's November 9th, 2025, I said carefully. "You were reported missing in November 2019. That was 6 years ago." The smile didn't change, didn't falter. "That's not possible. I left Billings this morning. I talked to my wife before I left. She made me promise to drive carefully." His voice was becoming more mechanical now, less human, like he was reciting lines he'd memorized. "I was supposed to be in Cody by noon. I have a meeting, important business. I just got turned around in the snow." I took a step back, my hand moving toward my weapon. "Mr. Hargrove, you need to stop moving." He didn't stop. He kept walking toward me, still holding out that folder, still wearing that terrible fixed smile. "I just need help getting back to the main road. Can you escort me down? I don't want to drive in these conditions alone." He was 5 feet away now, and the cold radiating from him was intense, far worse than the ambient temperature. My breath crystallized instantly in the air between us, and frost formed on my jacket. "Stop," I commanded, drawing my weapon. "Don't come any closer." He stopped, finally, but the smile never wavered. "You're not going to shoot me, officer. I'm just a lost traveler who needs help. That's your job, isn't it? To help people?" His voice had changed completely now, becoming something that mimicked human speech without understanding it. "You help people. You follow them when they call. You come when they need you, just like he did." He pointed past me, back down the road, toward where Fenwick's truck sat invisible in the storm. Just like Judd Fenwick did when we called for help. Just like all the others who patrol this road. "What are you?" I asked, keeping my weapon trained on his center mass, though I doubted bullets would do any good. "What is this place?" The thing wearing Dennis Hargrove's face tilted its head. "This is the between. The space where the road was and wasn't. Where the pass exists and doesn't exist. Your world built a highway here. Cut through our territory. Brought your cars and your noise and your certainty that you owned this mountain. But the mountain remembers what was here before. And some of us never left. It took a step backward toward the silver SUV. You can't save him, Trooper Culpepper. You can't save any of them. They're not lost. They're not waiting for rescue. They're part of the pattern now, part of the road's memory. Every winter, when the pass closes and the silence returns, they come back. They drive their routes, they park their vehicles, they wait for someone to find them. And when someone does, when another patrol car comes up the mountain looking for them, the road grows a little stronger, adds another name to its list, another ghost to its collection. I'm not staying here, I said firmly, and I'm not becoming part of your pattern. The entity laughed, a sound like ice cracking. You already are. The moment you followed those footprints, the moment you saw the old road, you became part of it. You'll leave today, drive back down the mountain, file your reports, tell yourself it was altitude sickness or stress or lack of sleep. But next winter, when the pass closes again, you'll come back. You'll patrol this section. And eventually you'll see the mile marker that doesn't cast a shadow. And when you do, you'll understand what Judd Fenwick understood, what Dennis Hargrove understood, what they all understood too late. The entity stepped backward into the SUV, or through it, I couldn't tell which. The vehicle's outline began to blur, becoming indistinct, fading like a photograph left in the sun. Within seconds, both the SUV and the thing pretending to be Dennis Hargrove were gone, leaving only undisturbed snow where they'd been. No tire tracks, no footprints, no evidence they'd ever existed. Just me, standing alone on an empty highway in a worsening storm, holding a weapon pointed at nothing. I lowered the gun with shaking hands and ran back to my cruiser. The engine started immediately, thank God, and I put it in gear without bothering to warm up or check my equipment. I just drove, as fast as I dared, back down the mountain. Fenwick's truck was gone when I passed the spot where it had been. No tracks, no exhaust vapor, nothing. Just empty road and falling snow. The gap in the rocks that led to the old road was sealed, had always been sealed. And somewhere in my jacket pocket, the note from Judd Fenwick felt like it was burning through the fabric, a warning I'd received too late to do any good. I made it back to the closure gate in record time, drove through, and didn't stop until I was back at May Ketteridge's ranch. She came out when she saw my cruiser, took one look at my face, and brought me inside without a word. She made coffee while I sat at her kitchen table, shaking from more than just the cold, trying to process what I'd experienced. Finally, she set a mug in front of me and sat down. "You saw something up there," she said. It wasn't a question. I nodded, not trusting my voice. She sipped her coffee, looking at me with eyes that had seen plenty of Montana winters, and probably plenty of things she couldn't explain. The old-timers used to say the Beartooth was cursed, said there was a reason the highway took so long to build, so many accidents during construction, so many workers who just walked off the job and never came back. They said the mountain didn't want to be crossed, didn't want a road carved through it, and every few years it takes someone back. Reminds us that we're visitors here, not owners. "Have you ever seen anything?" I asked. She was quiet for a long moment. "Once, back in the 70s, before they even finished paving the whole route. I was younger then, more foolish. Drove up there in November after they'd closed it, just to see what it looked like in winter. Found a car parked sideways across the road, engine running, door open. Exact same thing you described. I didn't get out to investigate. I just turned around and drove back down fast as I could. Never told anyone, figured they'd think I was crazy." She looked at me seriously. "But you believed me when I called about the lights. You went up there anyway." It's my job, I said, though the words felt hollow. Someone has to patrol that road. May shook her head slowly. That road doesn't need patrolling, Trooper. It needs to be left alone. Whatever's up there, it's older than the highway, older than Montana, maybe older than people. And it doesn't want our help. It just wants us to remember that some places are meant to stay empty. I finished my coffee and thanked her, then drove back to the station to file my report. What I wrote was sanitized, professional, stripped of everything that mattered. Responded to report a vehicle on closed highway, located truck matching description of vehicle missing since 1987. Upon investigation, vehicle disappeared, likely moved by unknown party. No signs of occupants. Closed road secured. Weather conditions prevented extended search. Recommend follow-up in spring when pass reopens. I didn't mention the old road. Didn't mention Dennis Hargrove or the entity or the note in my pocket. I just filed the report, logged my time, and went home. But I kept Fenwick's note. Kept it in my wallet, where I'd see it every time I reached for my license or credit card. A reminder that some warnings come too late. Some patterns are already in motion before you even know you're part of them. And some roads don't care whether you believe in them or not. They just wait, patient and hungry, for the next patrol car to come up the mountain looking for something that can't be found. 3 months passed before I went back to the Beartooth. 3 months of regular patrols on other sections of highway, of trying to convince myself that what I'd experienced up there had been nothing more than altitude sickness and stress. I threw myself into my work, taking extra shifts, volunteering for everything from school safety talks to accident reconstruction training. Anything to keep busy, anything to avoid thinking about that impossible road and the entities that walked it. But the note in my wallet was a constant reminder. Every time I opened it to pay for gas or show my credentials, I'd see those faded words. The mile marker doesn't cast a shadow. I still didn't know what it meant. It was late February when the call came. I was finishing up paperwork at the station when my supervisor, Lieutenant Brask, called me into his office. He was a no-nonsense career cop in his 50s, the kind of man who'd seen everything and wasn't impressed by much. He gestured for me to sit and slid a folder across his desk. "We've got a situation on the Beartooth. County Search and Rescue found something yesterday during a training exercise. I want you to take a look." I opened the folder and felt my stomach drop. The photos showed a section of highway I recognized immediately. The overlook where Dennis Hargrove's SUV had appeared and disappeared. But in these photos, taken in clear daylight, there was something else visible. A mile marker sign, standing about 20 feet off the roadway, partially buried in a snowdrift. "What's unusual about this?" I asked, though I already had a feeling I knew. Brask leaned back in his chair. "That mile marker isn't on our maps. According to county records, there's no marker at that location. The nearest official markers are at 15 and 17. There shouldn't be anything at 16. He paused. "But here's the interesting part. The search and rescue team took these photos around 1400 hours. Full daylight, clear weather. Look at the sign." I looked closer at the photos. The mile marker stood straight and tall, its reflective surface catching the camera flash. The ground around it showed normal shadows from the snowdrift, from rocks, from small bushes. But the sign itself cast no shadow. None at all. As if the sun's light passed right through it. "When can I go up there?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. Brask pulled out another document. "Road crew is doing a maintenance run tomorrow morning, checking for avalanche damage and clearing debris. You can ride up with them. I want documentation of this marker, proper measurements, photos from multiple angles. If it's unauthorized, we need to remove it. If it's some kind of prank, We need to know who put it there and why." He looked at me seriously. "I'm sending you because you know that stretch of road better than anyone. You've patrolled it for 9 years. If something's wrong up there, you'll spot it." If only he knew how wrong things already were. I agreed to go and spent the rest of the evening preparing. Extra batteries for my camera, backup radio, proper cold weather gear, and my personal copy of Fenwick's note, which I read about 20 times before finally managing to sleep. The next morning, I met the road crew at 0600 hours. The crew chief was a man I'd worked with before, a gruff operator named Judd Fenwick. I stopped cold when I heard the name. "Did you say Fenwick?" He looked at me strangely. "Yeah, Judd Fenwick. Something wrong with that?" I shook my head quickly. "No, just, I knew someone with that name once." He shrugged. "Common enough name, I suppose. Though my granddad had it too. He disappeared back in the 80s, up on this same highway. Family legend says he's still up there somewhere, never found him." My mouth went dry. "Your grandfather, he was the one who went missing in 1987? Judd nodded, climbing into his massive plow truck. "Yeah, I was just a kid when it happened. Barely remember him, to be honest. But every few years, someone claims they see his old truck up on the pass. Never amounts to anything, just stories people tell." He started the engine, which roared to life with a diesel rumble. "You coming or what?" I climbed into the passenger seat of my cruiser, following behind the plow truck as we made our way up the mountain. The road had been cleared recently, pushed back to bare pavement in most places, though ice still clung to the shadows and curves. The weather was clear, almost unnaturally so, with visibility stretching for miles. Perfect conditions for what we needed to do. As we climbed, I found myself watching for any sign of the old road, the hidden passage that had appeared and disappeared. But the cliff face showed nothing unusual, just solid rock and the occasional ice formation. We passed mile marker 15 without incident, a standard reflective sign firmly planted on the shoulder. At mile marker 16, Judd pulled his truck to a stop and I parked behind him. The unauthorized marker was exactly where the photos showed it, standing 20 feet off the main road in a slight depression. Up close, it looked completely normal. Standard Montana Highway Department design, correct font, proper spacing. The number 16 was clearly visible, along with the designation US 212. But something about it felt wrong. The metal was too clean, no rust or weathering despite being exposed to mountain conditions. The reflective coating was too bright, too new, and most disturbing, even in the bright morning sun, it cast absolutely no shadow. I photographed it from every angle while Judd walked around the area, checking for structural issues or avalanche risk. "This shouldn't be here," he said finally. "There's no record of us placing a marker at this location. And look at the base." I crouched down to examine where the post entered the ground. The snow around it was undisturbed, no signs of digging or installation. It was as if the sign had grown out of the earth rather than been planted there. "Can we pull it out?" I asked. Judd grabbed the post and pulled, testing its stability. It didn't budge even slightly. "Thing's solid. We'd need excavation equipment to remove it, and even then—" He trailed off, looking uncomfortable. "Even then what?" He glanced at me, then away. My granddad's last dispatch call, before he disappeared. He reported finding an unauthorized mile marker on the highway, said it was in the wrong place, wrong number, and he was going to investigate. That was the last anyone heard from him. The temperature seemed to drop 20 degrees in an instant. "What number did he report?" Judd's expression was grim. "Mile marker 16, same as this one." We stood there in silence, both of us staring at the sign that shouldn't exist. Finally, I pulled out my radio. "Dispatch, Unit 31. I'm at the location of the unauthorized marker. Can you confirm the original report from 1987? The one filed by... I hesitated. By the original Judd Fenwick? There was a long pause before dispatch responded. Unit 31, I'm pulling historical records now. Stand by. We waited, the silence broken only by the wind and the distant crack of ice shifting on the peaks above us. Then dispatch came back, and the voice was uncertain. Unit 31 confirmed. February 14, 1987, Trooper Judd Fenwick reported an unauthorized mile marker at his location. He indicated he was investigating possible vandalism. That was his last transmission. Search teams never found any unauthorized markers during the subsequent investigation. But you're looking at one right now, Judd said quietly, though the radio wasn't keyed. I keyed the mic. Copy, dispatch. I'm documenting the marker now. Request historical weather data for February 14, 1987. What were the conditions? Another pause. Unit 31, conditions on that date were clear. High pressure system, no precipitation, full sun. Temperature approximately 28 degrees Fahrenheit. Visibility unlimited. Clear weather, just like today. Full sun, just like today. Same conditions, same location, same impossible marker. The pattern was repeating. I approached the sign and placed my hand on it. The metal was cold, far colder than the ambient temperature could account for, cold enough to hurt even through my gloves. And as I touched it, I felt something else. A vibration, subtle but definitely present. Like the sign was humming at a frequency just below hearing. Judd noticed my reaction. You feel that? I nodded. There's something running through it, like electricity, but not quite. He pulled out a handheld radio frequency detector from his truck, something they use to check for interference with their equipment. He held it near the sign and the device immediately started squealing, the needle pegging at maximum. That's not possible, he muttered. This thing only registers radio frequencies, and it's hitting levels that would indicate a major broadcast tower. But there's nothing out here. I photographed the detector reading, then stepped back from the sign. As I did, I noticed something I'd missed before. The snow around the marker was melted in a perfect circle, maybe 10 feet in diameter, exposing bare ground. And on that ground, scratched into the dirt and gravel, were words. Dozens of words, carved by hand or stick or fingernail, layered over each other in a chaotic spiral. I knelt down, brushing away loose debris to read them. They were names. Michael Torrance, 1952. Sarah Brightwell, 1968. Daniel Krause, 1973. Kenneth Wade, 1979. Judd Fenwick, 1987. And more, so many more, spiraling inward toward the base of the marker. The most recent entry was from 2019. Dennis Hargrove. Judd, I called out. You need to see this. He came over and looked down at the names, his face going pale. That's my grandfather, and these others. He pulled out his phone and started searching. Michael Torrance. Missing person, 1952. Last seen on Beartooth Highway. He searched another name. Sarah Brightwell, 1968, same thing. They're all missing persons, Culpepper. Every single one of them disappeared on this highway. I stood up slowly, my mind racing. The marker wasn't just unauthorized. It was a memorial, or a catalog, or something worse. A record of everyone the road had taken. We need to remove this, Judd said firmly. I don't care what it takes. We bring in equipment, we dig this thing out, and we take it away from here. But even as he said it, I knew it wouldn't matter. The road would just put it back, or make another one, or find some other way to mark its territory. This wasn't about the sign. This was about something much older and much more patient. Let's document everything first, I said. Then we can decide next steps. We spent the next hour photographing every name, measuring the cleared circle, taking soil samples, checking radiation levels with Judd's equipment. Everything came back abnormal. The soil temperature was 10 degrees warmer than it should be. Background radiation was elevated but not dangerously so, and that vibration in the sign never stopped, just kept humming at that frequency that made my teeth ache. We were packing up our equipment when Judd's radio crackled. His crew, checking a section further up the highway, reporting in. "Chief, you need to see this. We've got another one." Judd keyed his mic. "Another what?" The voice came back uncertain. "Another marker. Mile marker 16. But this one's different. It's at mile marker 18, but the sign says 16. My blood ran cold. "How many are there?" I asked. Judd was already climbing into his truck. "Let's find out." We drove up the highway, and every mile we found another one. Mile marker 16 at position 18. Mile marker 16 at position 20. Mile marker 16 at position 22. 7 unauthorized markers in total, all claiming to be mile marker 16, all standing in locations where they shouldn't exist, and none of them cast shadows. By the time we reached the last one, near the high point of the pass, I was shaking. Not from cold, but from the realization of what we were seeing. The road wasn't just haunted. It was claiming territory, marking its boundaries, preparing for something. "This is impossible," Judd said, staring at the 7th marker. "We need to report this to someone. Highway department, county commissioners, I don't know. Someone who can make sense of this." But I knew no one would make sense of it. They'd send engineers and surveyors and they'd find nothing unusual. Or they'd find the markers and remove them, and next winter the markers would be back. Because the road wanted them there. Needed them there. I pulled out Fenwick's note and read it again. "The mile marker doesn't cast a shadow. When you see it, you'll understand." I was starting to understand. The markers weren't warnings for travelers. They were boundaries, delimiting a zone where normal rules didn't apply. Inside the circle defined by these 7 markers, the road belonged to something else. "We should leave," I said. "We should leave right now." Judd looked at me like I was crazy. "We haven't finished the inspection. We need to check the rest of the highway, make sure there's no avalanche risk." "There's worse things than avalanches up here," I said. But he was already walking back to his truck. I had no choice but to follow. We continued up the highway, past the 7th marker, into territory I'd never patrolled. The road here was narrower, more exposed, with drop-offs on both sides. This was the section that only opened for a few months each summer, the part that tourists came from around the world to photograph. In winter, it was alien and hostile, a knife edge between 2 voids, and that's where we found them. The others, they were standing along the roadside, spaced evenly, facing toward the pavement. 7 figures, matching the 7 markers. They weren't moving, weren't breathing, just standing in the snow in clothing from different eras. I recognized Dennis Hargrove immediately, wearing that same inadequate jacket, and beside him, an older man in a wool coat and hat with ear flaps. Judd Fenwick, the original, my companion's grandfather, looking exactly as he must have in 1987. The others were strangers, but their names were probably carved in the dirt around that first marker. They were the missing, the taken, the ones who'd become part of the road's pattern. Judd saw them too. He stopped his truck so suddenly that I nearly rear-ended him. "That's impossible," he whispered over the radio. "That's my grandfather. But he'd be almost 90 now. That man looks 40. I pulled up beside his truck and rolled down my window. "Don't get out. Whatever you do, don't leave your vehicle." But he was already opening his door, climbing down, walking toward the figure that wore his grandfather's face. "Granddad, is that you?" The figure turned slowly, mechanically, and I saw its face clearly for the first time. It had Judd Fenwick's features, but they were wrong. Frozen in time, preserved in some way that wasn't quite alive and wasn't quite dead. The eyes were the worst, empty and dark, reflecting nothing. "Judd," it said, and the voice was like wind through a crack in rock. "You shouldn't have come back. The road already has a Fenwick, it doesn't need another." My companion stopped, maybe 10 feet from his grandfather's ghost. "What happened to you? Where have you been?" "Nowhere," the entity said. "Everywhere. Walking the pattern, marking the boundaries, waiting for the road to wake. It sleeps in summer when you drive over it with your tourist cars and your motorcycles. But in winter, when the silence returns, it remembers what was here before, and it takes back what's owed." It raised one hand, pointing at the younger Judd. "You carry the name. You carry the blood. You've already been marked. One way or another, you'll join the pattern. Tonight, or next year, or 20 years from now, the road is patient." I got out of my cruiser, weapon drawn. "Step away from him. Move back to your vehicle." The 7 figures all turned to look at me in perfect unison, their movements synchronized like puppets on the same string. "Trooper Culpepper," they said in chorus, their voices overlapping into something that wasn't quite human speech. "You've seen the markers. You understand the boundaries. Why do you keep coming back? Why do you keep interfering?" I kept my weapon trained on the nearest figure. "Because it's my job. Because people need help. Because I don't believe the road owns anyone." They laughed, all 7 of them, the sound echoing off the mountain walls. "The road doesn't need to own you. It just needs to outlast you. You have years, decades at most. The road has centuries. Millennia. It was here before your kind drew lines on maps and called them highways. It will be here when your pavement crumbles and your markers rust away. And everyone who drives it, everyone who patrols it, everyone who thinks they understand it, eventually learns the truth." One of the figures stepped forward. It was Sarah Brightwell, according to the dates carved in the dirt. A woman in a 1960s-style dress, her hair styled in a way that had been fashionable 60 years ago. "We tried to leave," she said. "We all did. But the road doesn't let go. It shows you things, makes promises, leads you deeper into its territory until you can't find your way back. And then you're not quite alive and not quite dead. Just walking. Forever." Judd, the younger, had backed away from his grandfather's ghost, his face pale with shock. "This isn't real. This can't be real." I grabbed his arm. "Get in your truck. Now, we're leaving." But the figures moved to block the road, forming a line across both lanes. "You can leave," they said in unison, "but you'll be back. The road will call you, and next time you won't leave. Next time, you'll see your name carved in the dirt, and you'll understand that you were always going to become part of the pattern. Just like us. Just like everyone who sees the markers that don't cast shadows." I fired a warning shot into the air, the crack of the gunshot echoing across the empty mountains. The figures didn't flinch, didn't react. They just stood there, blocking our path, waiting. "Last warning," I shouted. "Clear the road or I will move you by force." Dennis Hargrove's ghost smiled. "You can't move us, Trooper. We're not here. We're back in our vehicles, still waiting for help. Still hoping for rescue. What you see is just memory, just the road showing you what it's taken. The real us. We're scattered across years and miles, trapped in the moment we made our final mistake." Then, simultaneously, all 7 figures stepped backward into the snow. But they didn't leave footprints. They just sank into the white surface and vanished, like stones dropping into water. Within seconds, they were gone. and the road ahead was clear. Judd and I stood there in the silence, both of us shaking, neither of us quite able to process what we'd seen. Finally, I found my voice. "Get in your truck. We're going back down, right now." We drove back down the mountain in convoy, past all 7 unauthorized markers, past the names carved in dirt, past the section where I'd seen the old road and the entity wearing Dennis Hargrove's face. We didn't stop, didn't speak, just drove until we were below the closure gate and back in territory that felt real and solid. When we reached May Ketteridge's ranch, Judd pulled over and climbed out of his truck. He looked like he'd aged 10 years in the last 4 hours. "What do I tell my family?" he asked. "What do I say about my grandfather?" I didn't have an answer. What could I say? That his grandfather was trapped in an endless winter, walking an impossible road, serving something that defied explanation. That seemed cruel, pointless. "Tell them you didn't find anything," I said finally. "Tell them the stories are just stories. Let them have their peace." He nodded slowly. "And the markers, what do we do about those?" I thought about it. Thought about the futility of trying to remove them. Thought about the warning Fenwick had left in that note. We document them, we warn other patrols, and we accept that some sections of road aren't meant to be patrolled in winter. It was a coward's answer, a surrender. But it was also the only realistic option. We couldn't fight something that existed outside our understanding of reality. I drove back to the station and filed my report, knowing, even as I wrote it, that no one would believe it. Unauthorized markers, check. Unusual characteristics, check. Recommended removal in spring, check. But I left out the ghosts, the entities, the names in the dirt. Those details would just get me a psychiatric evaluation and a desk job. Better to keep quiet, document what I could, and try to warn others without sounding insane. But as I sat at my desk, finishing the paperwork, I couldn't shake the feeling that the road had won. It had shown me its power, demonstrated its patience, made clear that I was temporary while it was eternal. And worst of all, it had marked me. I'd seen the markers. I'd crossed the boundaries. And according to those 7 ghosts, that meant I'd eventually become part of the pattern. Just a matter of time. I didn't sleep for 3 days after that patrol. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those 7 figures standing on the highway, their synchronized movements, their empty eyes, their voices speaking in unison about patterns and boundaries and the road's eternal hunger. I'd call in sick, which I'd never done in 9 years of service, but Lieutenant Brask knew something had happened up there. He'd seen my face when I came back, read the carefully sanitized report, and made the decision to give me time. "Take a week," he'd said. "Get your head right. Then we'll talk about what happens next." But a week wasn't going to be enough. A month wouldn't be enough. Because I knew, with a certainty that terrified me, that the road wasn't finished with me. I'd crossed into its territory, seen its markers, met its collected souls, and according to them, that meant I was marked too. Just a matter of time before I joined their endless patrol. I spent those 3 sleepless nights researching everything I could find about the Beartooth Highway's history. Construction had begun in 1931 and taken 5 years to complete, an eternity for a road that was only 68 miles long. The official record cited difficult terrain, harsh weather, and funding issues, but when I dug deeper, I found other stories. Workers who'd walked off the job claiming to see things in the mountains. Equipment that failed inexplicably. Accidents that didn't make sense. Rock falls that killed men who should have been safely out of range. Avalanches that struck in summer when there should have been no snow. One article from a 1934 newspaper caught my attention. It was an interview with a construction foreman named Albert Grimes, who'd quit the project after 2 years. "That mountain doesn't want a road," he'd said. We're carving through something sacred, something old. The Crow knew it, the Shoshone knew it, all the tribes that lived here knew to leave that pass alone. But we're white men with machines and dynamite, so we think we know better. Mark my words, that highway will take its toll. Not just in the building, but forever after. Some roads remember. I found similar accounts scattered across the decades. A 1956 article about mysterious disappearances along the newly opened highway. A 1970 letter to the editor from a truck driver who claimed the road changed in winter, that markers moved and curves appeared where none should exist. A 1989 investigation into the Judd Fenwick disappearance that included testimony from other troopers who'd reported unusual phenomena on winter patrols. All of it dismissed, explained away, rationalized into nothing. But the pattern was there if you knew how to look. Every few years, someone vanished. Every winter, the reports of strange lights and impossible vehicles increased. And every spring, when the snow melted and tourists returned, everything went back to normal, as if the road was satisfied with its winter feeding and could afford to sleep through summer. On the fourth night, I finally managed to sleep, and that's when the dreams started. I was driving the Beartooth in my cruiser, but it was wrong. The road stretched impossibly long, curves repeating, switchbacks leading back to themselves. Mile marker 16 appeared over and over, each one casting no shadow, each one surrounded by names carved in dirt. And standing beside each marker was one of the 7 figures, watching me drive past, waiting. I'd wake up gasping, my sheets soaked with sweat, and have to remind myself that I was home, safe, nowhere near that mountain. But the feeling of being watched never quite went away. On the 5th day, I received a phone call from Judd Fenwick, the road crew chief. His voice was shaky, uncertain. "Culpepper, I need to talk to you. Not on the phone, not at the station. Can you meet me somewhere?" We agreed on a diner in Red Lodge, neutral ground. Public, but not too crowded. When I arrived, he was already there, sitting in a back booth with a cup of coffee he wasn't drinking. He looked terrible, hollow-eyed and pale, like he hadn't slept any more than I had. I slid into the seat across from him. "What's going on?" He pulled out his phone and showed me a photo. It was his truck, parked in his driveway, taken from his kitchen window. In the driver's seat, barely visible through the windshield, was a figure. "I took this 2 nights ago," he said quietly. "Around 0200 hours. I heard a noise outside, looked out, and saw someone sitting in my truck. I grabbed my shotgun and went out there, but by the time I got outside, the truck was empty. Doors locked, no signs of entry, nothing." He swiped to another photo. Then I found this on my windshield. The second photo showed a piece of paper, old and yellowed, with handwriting I recognized. The same handwriting from the note Judd Fenwick had left in his truck in 1987. It read, "They're using my face now, using my name. Trying to call you back to the mountain. Don't go. No matter what they promise, no matter what they threaten, don't go. The road only takes. It never gives back. JF." I looked up at him. "Have you shown this to anyone else?" He shook his head. Who would believe me? That my dead grandfather is somehow warning me from beyond the grave? That there's something up on that mountain that's been collecting people for decades? He laughed bitterly. I sound insane even saying it out loud. I pulled Fenwick's original note from my wallet and laid it on the table between us. "You're not insane, and you're not alone. Your grandfather tried to warn others, tried to document what he'd found. This is the note he left in his truck. I found it in February." Judd stared at the note, his hands trembling slightly as he reached out to touch it. This is his handwriting. I've seen his old letters, his duty logs. This is definitely him. He looked at me with desperate eyes. What do we do? How do we stop this? I wished I had an answer. I don't know if we can stop it, but we can try to understand it, document it, warn others, make sure no one else ends up like the 7 we saw up there. We spent the next 2 hours comparing notes, literally and figuratively. Judd had done his own research, found his own newspaper articles and missing person reports. Together, we'd assembled a pattern that was undeniable. Every winter, between November and March, someone vanished on the Beartooth. Sometimes their vehicle was found, sometimes not. Sometimes there were search efforts. Sometimes the person was simply written off as having left the area voluntarily. But the pattern held. 68 miles of highway, nearly 90 years of history, and dozens of missing people. We need to go to someone with this, Judd said. Highway Department, FBI, someone who has the authority to investigate properly. But I knew that wouldn't work. They'll want physical evidence, witnesses, documentation that holds up in court. We have none of that. What we have are ghost stories, hallucinations, reports from people who might have been suffering from altitude sickness or hypothermia. On paper, there's nothing here. Judd slumped in his seat. So we just accept it? Let the road keep taking people? I shook my head. No. We do what your grandfather did. We document everything, leave warnings for whoever comes after us, and try to save the ones we can. And we don't go back up there in winter. Not alone, not ever. That should have been the end of it. 2 men making a pact to stay away from a haunted highway, to avoid becoming the next names carved in the dirt. But the road had other plans. It started small. Reports of unusual activity on the Beartooth, even though it was still officially closed. Hikers seeing lights moving along the highway at night. Snowmobilers finding fresh tire tracks that shouldn't exist. County maintenance crews reporting equipment failures and strange readings whenever they got near the closure gates. And always calls about abandoned vehicles. Trucks and cars sitting on the closed highway, engines running, doors open, no signs of occupants. Local sheriff's department responded to the first few, found nothing unusual, and eventually stopped going up there. Too dangerous, they said. Too much risk for what was probably just teenagers playing pranks. But I knew better. The road was advertising, sending out lures, creating situations that demanded a response, trying to draw in the next patrol car, the next well-meaning trooper who'd see those lights and feel obligated to investigate. I warned Lieutenant Brask, told him in the most professional terms I could manage that winter patrols of the closed Beartooth should be suspended indefinitely. He listened, looked at the pattern of reports I'd compiled, and agreed to limit access. Only essential maintenance, he said, and only in daylight with multiple units. No one goes up there alone. It was a good policy, a smart policy. It should have kept people safe. But in late March, 3 weeks before the scheduled spring opening, we got a call that changed everything. A school bus, carrying 12 middle school students and 2 teachers back from a field trip to Yellowstone, had missed the turnoff for the main highway and ended up on the closed Beartooth. The driver, unfamiliar with the area and trusting his GPS, had driven through the closure gate without realizing it was closed. Now they were stuck, approximately 10 miles up the mountain, with a bus that wouldn't start and no cell phone service. The call came from the teacher's satellite phone, and it was frantic. "We're freezing up here. The bus heater died when the engine quit. We've got kids in spring jackets, no survival gear, and it's starting to snow. We need help immediately." Lieutenant Brask assembled a response team. 2 patrol cars, a county maintenance truck with a generator and heaters, and a paramedic unit. He looked at me when assigning positions. "Culpepper, I know you've got issues with this highway. But we need experienced people up there, and you know that road better than anyone. Can you handle it?" I wanted to say no. Wanted to cite policy, cite safety concerns, cite anything that would keep me off that mountain. But there were 12 kids up there, scared and cold and completely unaware of what they'd driven into. "I'll go," I said. "But I want Trooper Millard with me, and I want everyone on the same radio frequency. No one goes more than visual distance from another unit." Brask agreed, and within 20 minutes we were rolling. The convoy moved up the mountain in tight formation, maintaining constant radio contact. The weather was deteriorating fast, spring snow that shouldn't have been this heavy, visibility dropping to dangerous levels. We passed the closure gate and continued up, following the tracks the bus had left in the fresh snow. At mile marker 8, Trooper Millard, who was riding with me, pointed ahead. "There, I see the bus." It was parked sideways across the road, emergency flashers on, windows fogged with condensation. As we pulled up, I could see faces pressed against the glass, kids looking out at us with relief and fear. The teacher emerged from the bus door, a woman in her 40s named Mrs. Parrish, nearly crying with gratitude. "Thank God. We've been here for almost 3 hours. The kids are getting hypothermic and some of them are panicking." The paramedic team immediately began assessing the students while the maintenance crew set up portable heaters and got the generator running. I walked around the bus, checking for mechanical issues, looking for any sign of what had caused it to fail. The engine was cold, dead, no obvious damage or leaks. "When did it quit?" I asked Mrs. Parrish. She wrapped her arms around herself, shivering. "Right after we passed a mile marker. One of the kids pointed it out, said the number looked wrong. Then the engine just died. Everything died. Radio, heater, even the dashboard lights. It was like something drained all the power." My blood ran cold. "What mile marker? What number did it say?" She thought for a moment. 16, I think, but that seemed wrong because we'd just passed marker 14. I remember thinking the numbers were out of order. I turned to Millard. "Get everyone loaded up and ready to move, right now." She saw the urgency in my face and didn't question it. Within minutes, we had all 12 kids and both teachers distributed among the patrol cars and maintenance vehicles. The bus would have to be towed later. Right now, I just wanted everyone off this mountain. We were turning the convoy around when the radio crackled with heavy static. Through the interference, a voice came through. "Unit 13, this is dispatch. We have a report of a stranded motorist at mile marker 16, Beartooth Highway. Single female, vehicle disabled, requesting immediate assistance." I grabbed the mic. "Dispatch, we're currently evacuating a school bus from the Beartooth. Recommend that call be routed to County Sheriff." More static. Then the voice came back, but it was wrong. Too flat, too emotionless. "Negative, Unit 31. This is your assigned patrol area. You are required to respond." Millard looked at me, confused. "That doesn't sound like normal dispatch. And we're not assigned to closed highway patrols." I didn't respond to the radio. Instead, I switched to the convoy frequency. "All units, stay together. We're heading down now. Do not stop for any reason. Do not investigate any vehicles you see, just maintain speed and keep moving." The maintenance chief came back immediately. "What's going on, Culpepper?" Before I could answer, we rounded a curve, and there it was. Mile marker 16, standing on the right shoulder, exactly where no marker should be, and parked beside it was a vehicle, a dark sedan with its hazard lights flashing, driver's door hanging open. Millard spotted it at the same moment. Should we check it out? Could be the stranded motorist dispatch mentioned. I accelerated past it without slowing. That's not a real call. That's the road trying to separate us, trying to pull someone away from the group. But as we passed the marker, something happened. The last vehicle in our convoy, The paramedic unit suddenly veered off the road. I watched in my rearview mirror as it pulled up behind the dark sedan and stopped. "Paramedic unit, what are you doing?" I called over the radio. "Return to convoy formation immediately." Static, then a voice I didn't recognize, male, calm. "There's someone in this vehicle. We're going to check on them." Millard grabbed the radio. "Negative. Get back in your vehicle and return to convoy." But they were already getting out. 2 paramedics I'd worked with before, both experienced professionals. They approached the dark sedan, flashlights out, following proper procedure. And as they reached the driver's door, something inside moved. I slammed on the brakes and put the cruiser in reverse. "All units, stop. We have personnel investigating a vehicle. I'm going back for them." But Trooper Hardesty, driving the second patrol car with half the students, grabbed his radio. "Culpepper, we need to get these kids down. We can't stop here." He was right. We had 12 scared children and 2 teachers who had no idea what was happening. The responsible thing was to get them to safety. But I couldn't leave 2 paramedics behind. Couldn't let them become names carved in dirt. "Continue down the mountain," I ordered. "Get the kids to the base. Millard and I will retrieve the paramedics and follow." Hardesty didn't argue. The convoy continued down, while Millard and I backed up toward the dark sedan. The 2 paramedics were leaning into the vehicle now, apparently treating someone inside. I could hear them calling out medical jargon over their portable radio. "Female, approximately 30s, unresponsive, possible hypothermia. We need the spine board and thermal blankets." It sounded routine, professional, exactly what you'd expect. But something was wrong. The way they were moving was too slow, too deliberate. And I couldn't see who they were treating. Couldn't see anyone in that vehicle at all. I pulled up behind their ambulance and got out, Millard right beside me. "Hold your position," I called to the paramedics. "We're going to assess the situation before proceeding." They didn't respond, just kept working, their movements synchronized in a way that made my skin crawl. I approached, cautiously, hand on my weapon, flashlight cutting through the falling snow. As I got closer, I could see inside the dark sedan. It was empty, completely empty. But the 2 paramedics were treating someone, their hands moving through empty air, checking vitals on a patient who wasn't there. "Stop!" I shouted. "There's no one in that vehicle." They ignored me, continuing their phantom treatment. One of them pulled out a cervical collar and placed it around nothing, securing it carefully. The other prepared an IV bag, hanging it from an invisible stand. They were going through all the motions of emergency care for a patient that didn't exist. Millard grabbed my arm. "Culpepper, their eyes. Look at their eyes." I looked. The paramedics' eyes were open, but unfocused, staring at something I couldn't see. Or seeing something that wasn't there in our reality but was very present in theirs. They'd been caught, pulled into whatever pocket of wrongness existed around that marker. "We need to pull them out," I said. "Physically drag them away from that vehicle." Millard nodded and we moved in, each grabbing one of the paramedics. The moment I touched him, I felt it. A cold so intense it burned. And a pull, like gravity had reversed and was trying to drag me into that empty sedan. I could see it now, what they were seeing. There was someone in the vehicle, a woman, pale and still, wearing clothes from decades ago. And beyond her, through the windows, I could see more. Dozens of vehicles, all parked along the highway, all with their doors open, all empty but full at the same time. I jerked back, breaking contact, and the vision vanished. The paramedic I'd been holding collapsed to the ground, gasping. Millard had managed to pull the other one free, and he was on his knees in the snow, vomiting. "Get them to the ambulance," I ordered. "We're leaving now." We dragged both men back to their unit and loaded them inside. They were conscious but disoriented, babbling about patients they needed to treat, people waiting for help. I climbed into the driver's seat of the ambulance while Millard brought our cruiser. The keys were still in the ignition, and the engine started immediately. As I put it in gear, I looked back at the dark sedan one more time. The driver's door was closing, slowly, deliberately, pulled shut by invisible hands. And standing beside the vehicle now was a woman. She was watching us, her expression sad but accepting. As we drove away, I saw her turn and walk toward the mile marker, her footsteps leaving no prints in the snow. She reached the sign, placed one hand on it, and simply vanished, absorbed into the metal like water into sand. We made it down the mountain without further incident. The convoy was waiting at the base. Kids were being checked by other paramedics, and parents were being notified. The 2 paramedics we'd pulled away from that sedan were transported to the hospital for evaluation. Both recovered physically, but neither could explain what had happened. They remembered stopping to help, remembered treating a patient, but couldn't describe who it was or what injuries they were addressing. After a week of observation, they were released with instructions to follow up with mental health services. Lieutenant Brask called me into his office the day after. He didn't say anything at first, just pulled out a bottle of whiskey and 2 glasses. We drank in silence for a few minutes before he finally spoke. I've been doing this job for 28 years. Seen a lot of weird stuff, a lot of things that don't add up. But what you described in your report, what those paramedics can't remember, what we keep finding on that highway. He trailed off, staring at his glass. I'm recommending that the Beartooth remain closed indefinitely for winter patrols. Emergency calls only, and only with full team response. No single units, no independent investigation. That won't be enough, I said. The road will find ways to separate people, to create situations that demand response. It's been doing it for 90 years. Brask nodded slowly. Then we adapt. We train our people to recognize the signs, to question calls that seem wrong, to never trust what they see up there in winter. It's the best we can do. He finished his whiskey and looked at me seriously. You did good work up there, Culpepper. Saved those kids, saved those paramedics, but I'm taking you off Beartooth Patrol. You've seen too much, and the next time might not end as well. I should have felt relief. Should have been grateful for the reassignment. But instead, I felt only dread, because I knew it didn't matter where Brask assigned me. The road had marked me, claimed me, added me to its pattern, and sooner or later, it would call me back. The dreams continued every night. Sometimes I was driving the highway, seeing those markers repeat endlessly. Sometimes I was standing beside one of them, watching other patrol cars drive past, trying to warn them, but making no sound. And sometimes I was carved into the dirt myself, my name added to the list of those who'd been taken. It's been 6 months since that rescue. 6 months since I last set foot on the Beartooth Highway. Summer came, the road reopened, and thousands of tourists drove it without incident. The mile markers we documented were gone, removed by county maintenance crews who found nothing unusual about them. The dark sedan was never found, and the bus we'd evacuated was towed down without problems. Everything returned to normal, as it always did. But Judd Fenwick called me last week. He'd been up on the pass doing summer maintenance, routine work in perfect weather. I saw something, he said, his voice tight. At mile marker 16. The real one, the one that's supposed to be there. Someone had carved names into the dirt around it. Fresh carvings, Culpepper, recent. What names? I asked, though part of me already knew. The 2 paramedics, the ones we pulled away from that sedan in March. Their names were there, carved just like all the others. My blood ran cold. But they're fine, they recovered, went back to work, they're still alive. Judd was quiet for a moment. Are they? Or are they like my grandfather? Going through the motions, working their shifts, living their lives, but already marked? Already part of the pattern? I didn't have an answer, still don't. But I've checked on both paramedics since that call, watched them from a distance, looked for signs that they're not quite themselves anymore. So far, they seem normal. But sometimes I catch them staring off into nothing, and I wonder what they're seeing, what they're hearing, whether they're still fully here or already halfway gone. And I wonder the same thing about myself. How much of me is still the trooper who started this job 9 years ago, and how much has been claimed by that mountain? Last night, I had a different dream. I was standing beside mile marker 16, the original one, and I was carving my own name into the dirt. Not because I wanted to, but because it felt right. Because the pattern demanded it. Because after everything I'd seen, everything I'd experienced, I finally understood what Judd Fenwick had meant in his note. The mile marker doesn't cast a shadow because it exists partially outside our world, straddling the boundary between what is and what was, between the living and the taken. And once you see it, once you really see it, you can never unsee it. You become part of its gravity, pulled slowly but inevitably toward the moment when you stop being a visitor to that place and become a permanent resident. I'm writing this down because I need someone to know. Need there to be a record that isn't sanitized, isn't explained away, isn't dismissed as hallucination or altitude sickness or stress. The Beartooth Highway is not just a road. It's something older, something that tolerates our presence during the summer months but reclaims its territory when winter comes. And it takes payment for the trespass. 3 names a year carved in dirt, absorbed into the pattern. Sometimes it takes them quickly, a single winter storm, a moment of disorientation, gone. Other times it's slower, marking them first, letting them live out their days knowing that eventually, when the timing is right, they'll be called back. I don't know which category I fall into. Don't know if I'll disappear this winter or 20 winters from now. But I know it's coming. I can feel it in my bones, in my dreams, in the way shadows sometimes fall wrong, and temperatures drop without warning. The road is patient. It has all the time in the world. And I have whatever time it decides to give me. So I'll keep working, keep patrolling my assigned routes, keep helping people who need it. But I'll also keep this record hidden, leave copies in places where someone might find them if I vanish. Leave warnings like Judd Fenwick did, like so many others probably have, hoping that maybe, eventually, someone will figure out how to break the pattern. Or maybe not. Maybe the pattern is eternal, as much a part of that mountain as the stone and snow. Maybe the best we can do is recognize it, respect it, and try to minimize how many names get added to the dirt. That's what I tell myself on the bad nights when the dreams are particularly vivid and I wake up cold despite the summer heat. That, at least I saved those kids. At least I pulled those paramedics away before they were fully taken. At least I've documented enough that the next trooper who patrols that highway will have some warning, some chance to avoid my mistakes. But I also know that warnings aren't enough. Judd Fenwick left warnings. So did others, if you know where to look. And still the pattern continues. Still the names accumulate. Still that impossible mile marker stands in 7 places and 0 places simultaneously, casting no shadow because it needs no shadow, existing purely to mark the boundary between the world of the living and the world of the road's eternal collection. I've stopped sleeping much, stopped trying really, because sleep brings dreams, and dreams bring me back to that highway, back to those markers, back to the moment when I'll finally stop being Trooper Rowan Culpepper and become just another name carved in dirt. The only question is when. This winter? Next winter? 10 winters from now, when I'm older and slower and the road decides I've served my purpose as a warning to others. I don't know. Can't know. Can only wait and watch and try to save whoever I can before my name gets added to the list. That's what it means to patrol the Beartooth. You're not just watching the road is watching you back, and it never, ever forgets. May Ketteridge calls me sometimes, just to check in, she says, just to make sure I'm all right. But I know what she's really checking for. She's looking for the signs that I'm not all right, that I'm slipping into whatever happened to her friend back in the 70s, to Judd Fenwick in 87, to Dennis Hargrove in 2019. She's watching for the moment when I stop being present and start being absent, when my eyes lose focus and I stare at things she can't see. So far, I've managed to convince her I'm fine. But it's getting harder. The pull is getting stronger. 2 days ago, I drove past the eastern closure gate. Didn't mean to, wasn't planning to, just found myself on that road heading toward the mountains. I made it almost to May's ranch before I realized what I was doing and turned around. But the impulse is there now, constant and growing. The road wants me back, wants me to see those markers one more time, wants me to cross that boundary and join the others who walk the pattern. And the terrifying part is that some mornings, I want to go. Want to stop fighting, stop worrying, stop carrying this weight. Want to just drive up there. Find that mile marker that doesn't cast a shadow, and finally understand what it all means. But not yet. Not while there are still people who might drive that highway, still kids who might get stranded, still paramedics who might stop to help phantom patients. Not while I can still make a difference, still save someone from the fate that's waiting for me. I'll fight it as long as I can, document what I know, warn whoever will listen. And when I finally can't fight anymore, when the pull becomes too strong and I find myself driving up that mountain one last time, I hope someone finds this record. Hope they read it and understand that the warnings are real. The danger is real, and the pattern is still repeating. The Beartooth Highway doesn't need patrol in winter. It needs to be left alone, respected for what it is, given the space to exist without interference. But we're humans with badges and responsibilities and an instinct to help people in trouble. So, we'll keep going up there, keep responding to calls, keep trying to save the ones the road wants to take. And the road will keep adding names to its collection, patient and eternal and utterly indifferent to our efforts. That's the truth no report will ever capture, no investigation will ever prove. Some places are older than our understanding, stranger than our categories, and hungrier than our capability to satisfy. The Beartooth is one of them, and everyone who patrols it, everyone who crosses it, everyone who thinks they understand it, eventually learns the same lesson. The mile marker doesn't cast a shadow because it doesn't need to. It exists in all times and no time, marking a boundary we can see but never truly cross. At least, not while we're still counting ourselves among the living. I am Trooper Rowan Culpepper, Montana Highway Patrol, Badge 4157, 9 years of service. And I'm writing this in case I don't make it to year 10. In case the road calls me back before I'm ready, before I've said everything that needs saying. If you're reading this, if you're investigating my disappearance or finding my vehicle abandoned on a closed highway in winter, know that I fought it as long as I could. Know that the warnings in this document are real, earned through experience and terror and nights without sleep. And know that if you're a trooper, if you're assigned to patrol that highway, you need to be ready. Not just for weather and accidents and routine traffic stops, but for something much older, much stranger, and much more patient than anything in your training manual. The mile marker doesn't cast a shadow. When you see it, you'll understand. But by then, it might already be too late.